Chapter 149. The death of Enkidu. As they spoke, they had already rushed to the center of the battlefield. Ahi waved his hand, and his personal guards separated into two groups of cavalry to meet them. The chariots also went around the battlefield and surrounded them from both sides. This was a duel between elites, and the battle was very intense as soon as it began. Swords and spears collided, men and horses roared, collided, and began a strangulation. The light of swords and spears was accompanied by various magic attacks and defenses. Although Ahi did not train a team of priests like Gilgamesh, he was also prepared. Not only did he have a few supreme warriors and supreme mages in his personal guards, but he also transferred dozens of noble warriors who had undergone the second awakening of power from the army to the front line. For a while, they were evenly matched. Gilgamesh sat in the chariot and did not move. He held his staff and cast various magic to help. Ahi stood in the distance and did not move. He held his iron staff and stood guard. The two supreme mages behind him sang loudly and worked together to cast magic to help their own personal guards. For a while, they could not help the five supreme warriors. The more elite the direct collision, the heavier the casualties. In a cavalry battle, it was difficult to notice which warrior fell under whose sword and spear. After a charge battle accompanied by the roar of magic, both sides lost a lot of people after breaking through the formation. Abel had fallen in a pool of blood. Abel was already lying in a pool of blood. In such a battlefield, no one noticed how he died. Gilgamesh finally stood up, holding his staff and shining with divine light. He pulled out the sword from his waist and slowly walked out of the chariot. Looked back at the two supreme mages behind him, then gripped his iron staff tightly and slowly walked forward. Between them, it was the battlefield where Enkidu and the five supreme warriors fought. The commanders of both sides were finally going to directly participate in the battle. The battle in the wilderness had entered a state of strangulation. The two armies crossed each other, and the formation was somewhat unstable. The commanders could only strictly order the infantry phalanx at the back to stabilize. At this time, it was a battle of morale. Who could last until the end? And the turning point that determined the direction of the battle was the battle between the masters in the center. Once the two commanders took action, they could not afford to lose. Walked forward step by step, as if turning a blind eye to the battle between the supreme warriors in front of him. There seemed to be tension in the air. At this moment, Enkidu suddenly let out an earth-shattering roar. He spun around and swept out with his sword. That broken sword emitted a dazzling golden light. With a series of muffled groans, the five supreme warriors who were besieging him were all sent flying. Gabriel, who had the strongest will to fight, was bleeding from the corner of his mouth. His battle axe had several cracks on it, and the armor on his body had shattered into pieces. Medanzo was panting heavily, the dagger in his hand humming in pain. Looking at the wolf Fang in Longteng's hand, the sharp spikes had been flattened by the impact, turning into a huge hammer. Enkidu knew that Gilgamesh was coming, so he used all his strength to push back the five supreme warriors who were besieging him, and the two were about to regroup. Ricard and Vord seized this rare opportunity to give up the battlefield on the side of the bodyguards and cast high-level offensive magic towards Enkidu. Both of them cast spatial fissure magic at the same time, and the space where Enkidu was standing was instantly shattered into countless fragments. Even the light and shadow became incomplete. Enkidu pointed his sword to the sky, and the golden light of the sword erupted. Not only did the broken sword become complete, but the light enveloped his whole body, and even the spatial fissure could not shake it. Gilgamesh pointed his staff from afar, and the space between heaven and earth became blurred. This was information annihilation magic. At the highest level, it could even erase the boundaries between space and time. The two supreme mages were not only attacking Enkidu, but also preventing Gilgamesh from joining the battle. The magic they used should be the most suitable. Gilgamesh, on the other hand, dealt with the obstacles and was about to rush over. He gritted his teeth and was about to fly up with the iron staff in his hand when he suddenly felt his body go limp. It was as if a powerful and irresistible force had invaded the depths of his heart. He stood there without moving. Even when facing Enkidu, Enkidu had never felt this way. Who was it? This force seemed to be irresistible, but it was not directed at Enkidu. Enkidu could clearly feel the invisible pressure directly invading the depths of his soul. For a moment, he was even in a trance, inexplicably recalling all the weak moments in his life, as well as the trials and tribulations he had experienced. Enkidu felt this way, and everyone around him was frozen at this moment. Almost at the same time, they looked up at the sky. The sky had turned dark, and the scorching sun in the sky had disappeared without a trace. A spiral gap was torn in the sky, as if leading to the endless unknown. Thud, thud, thud. The sounds of weapons and armor clashing could be heard, as the surrounding warhorses fell to the ground, and the soldiers fell to the ground in shock. The intense battle had actually come to an end without a sound. Tens of thousands of people looked up at the sky. In the middle of the battle, a black vortex was constantly surging and circling, as if it was an endless abyss extending from an unknown space. The soldiers were inexplicably terrified, and the two supreme mages floating in the air were unable to calm their minds and run their prayers to boost their morale. Even they themselves did not dare to stay in the sky any longer and had already drifted down. Black was not a color. When all colors and shadows disappeared, it was absolute darkness. But the black vortex in the sky was so bright and dazzling, as if it had torn open a gap that could devour everything. Gilgamesh also stood still and looked up at the sky in shock. The black vortex tore open the sky ferociously, its center pointing straight at Enkidu. The continent's #1 warrior suddenly woke up from his shock, as if he had realized or understood something. He roared and laughed, "Is this the test I have to face? Or is it the curse of the gods? Just in time, I have been waiting for a long time." In the midst of his laughter, he leaped high and slashed at the black vortex with his sword. The power of this sword was even stronger than the cloud eagle he had slashed at Horus a few days ago. It was a stunning scene. The golden sword condensed into a giant blade hundreds of feet long in the air, and with an incomparably violent force, it slashed at the black vortex. Then, Enkidu's laughter stopped. The black light only trembled slightly, and the golden sword disappeared without a trace as if it was annihilated. It seemed that it was not an attack that could be resisted with strength. Following that, the huge whirlpool began to spin, and a black bolt of lightning shot towards Enkidu without a sound or presence. Enkidu raised his sword to block the attack. The golden light on his snake-scale armor vibrated, making him look like an inviolable god descending from the sky with a loud thud. The black lightning was like maggots, twisting and slashing down. Who was fighting the continent's #1 warrior? Gilgamesh was the first to react. He roared and raised his staff high. A huge figure appeared in the air. It was Gilgamesh's divine form. This figure condensed from magic power appeared in the air, and with all of Gilgamesh's strength, it held a sharp fang in its hand. With a roar, it struck at the black vortex. He and Enkidu had cooperated many times, and already knew what to do. Enkidu landed on the ground to defend, and Gilgamesh took the opportunity to use his most powerful magic to attack the enemy from behind. But in the next moment, the light dissipated, and Gilgamesh's divine form collapsed in front of the black light. The sharp fang also fell down. Gilgamesh took a few steps back and spat out a mouthful of blood. He could only stand on the ground with his staff. He couldn't help Enkidu, and he couldn't even join in the battle against the black vortex. He could only watch helplessly. You watched it all happen. He didn't know what was going on, and naturally, he used detection magic to sense it. If this was really the curse of the so-called god, he wanted to know which god did it, and where the god was hiding. But he didn't find any traces, and only felt an inexplicable and terrifying aura in the black vortex and the thunderbolt. Screams, roars, sounds of fighting, and wailing seemed to come from the distant sky, but also sounded like it was ringing in the ears. Along with these sounds, countless people's pain, resentment, fear, hesitation, despair, and other feelings irresistibly invaded the depths of their souls, forming a powerful and incredible spiritual force, as if to completely destroy their consciousness. Yi was just a bystander, and he sensed all this with detection magic. No one knew how Enkidu felt, but it was easy to imagine. The Black Thunderbolt not only contained a powerful spiritual force, but also a continuous burst of energy, directly slashing at Enkidu. The Supreme Warrior waved the broken sword wildly, and the golden sword light rolled up like a hurricane around his body, but he couldn't disperse or repel this indescribable attack. He didn't even know who his opponent was. This seemed to be a duel with no hope in sight. Enkidu broke out the most powerful force in his life, and the snake scales on his body exploded like golden smoke. As soon as Yi was immersed in the battle, his body and mind were attacked by an indescribable tremor. He retracted his detection magic and looked down at the other mages on the battlefield. They all had a painful and hesitant expression on their faces. It was no wonder that any mage who saw such a scene would use detection magic to sense it. If they were not careful, they would be hurt by the impact. Most of the soldiers naturally didn't know detection magic, but when they looked up at the sky, an irresistible tremor arose in their hearts, and they couldn't even hold the weapons in their hands steadily. Those who could still think wondered if this was the punishment and curse of the gods. Even the Igut soldiers couldn't muster up a trace of fighting spirit at this time. In the face of the unknown terror that tore the sky apart, it was as if they were under great pressure. This battle couldn't go on anymore, and only Enkidu was left to fight alone. Yi came back to his senses, quietly summoned the generals around him, and quickly ordered the whole army to retreat. The Igut army quietly retreated, and many soldiers gradually breathed a sigh of relief. Inexplicably, everyone wanted to get as far away from the battlefield as possible. When retreating, Yi sat in the carriage. Although he didn't look back, he could still feel the pain and despair contained in the Black Thunderbolt. He had brought a strange ability from the underworld, which was the ability to feel the inner emotions of others. Since it was an ability, of course, he could control and use it freely, and he didn't have to feel it when he didn't want to. But at this time, this ability was out of control. When he retracted his detection magic, he could still feel the thoughts in the Black Thunderbolt. The thoughts contained in the Black Thunderbolt seemed to be alive, but not like a person. Instead, it was like the hearts of many people, directly drilling into their souls and appearing, unable to be dispelled. In the face of such an impact, how strong would one need to be to stay awake and not lose oneself? Yi couldn't help but remember that he had a similar feeling in the underworld of the Queen of Kela. In the various houses of the underworld, he had heard the prayers, pleas, curses, and resentment of countless people woven together. At that time, he could only pass through safely by calming his mind. Those thoughts were only sensed by Yi, and did not converge together to actively attack his soul. But at this moment, Enkidu was clearly suffering from such an impact. Yi's ability came from this experience, and now that he experienced Enkidu's situation, he couldn't help but be shocked. After retreating back to Kenmut, Yi did not hide far away. Instead, he climbed up the city wall and continued to observe. The Igut army silently retreated, but the Uruk Legion remained where they were because Gilgamesh hadn't given the order. Gilgamesh didn't give up. He gathered the mages in the army to set up a magic formation and personally cast all kinds of magic. But the Black Thunderbolt seemed to be unaffected. Gilgamesh changed his mind again and tried to save Enkidu, but his efforts were in vain. The Black Thunderbolt fell from the sky and had already entangled Enkidu. If the mages didn't pay attention to the detection magic, they would be injured by the terrifying impact. Gilgamesh's face was devoid of blood. His hand holding his staff was trembling, but he was still unwilling to give up. Looked at the battlefield that was engulfed by the black vortex. Due to the uncontrollable ability, he was also suffering from extreme pain. His whole body was soaked in cold sweat, but he gritted his teeth and persevered, not missing a single detail. He had no choice but to look. The huge vortex in the sky seemed to have a strange attractive force that contained the unknown secrets of the gods. Seemed to have understood something, but he was even more confused. He could only feel it, but he didn't have the time to think or comprehend it. What Enkidu was enduring was not only the impact on his soul. The black thunderbolt was accompanied by a huge explosion of energy. It was as if countless invisible enemies were charging at him without stopping. At this moment, couldn't help but admire Enkidu. He was actually able to endure such an attack until now. Although it wasn't a long time, it was enough to shock the world. The serpent-scale armor of this number 1 warrior of the continent had been completely shattered, and his clothes had been reduced to ash. His robust and burly body was naked, emitting a bronze radiance that was faintly discernible amidst the black lightning. He madly waved the broken sword in his hand. The golden sword ray had already turned into a mist that enveloped his body, but it was getting dimmer and dimmer in the midst of the black thunderbolt. Seeing that Enkidu's sword ray was about to be annihilated in the black light, the warrior let out the last roar of his life. The sword ray once again shone dazzlingly. He leaped high into the air and rushed towards the center of the black vortex. His voice reverberated across the battlefield. "Gil, I finally understand. This isn't the curse of the gods, but the judgment of fate." What did Enkidu understand? No one could ask, because this was the last thing he said in this world. While I was still in a daze, he suddenly heard another roar, as if thousands of wild bulls were roaring in his soul. It was Humbaba's roar. Humbaba had long been killed by Enkidu. How could his soul-shaking roar appear in the black vortex? Sensing the sudden impact of the roar, Ah's body went limp and he almost fell. At this moment, he heard the several supreme mages behind him exclaim at the same time, "Watch out!" A golden ray of light shot straight towards the city tower of Kenmet from the black vortex. It was the sword in Enkidu's hand. The last thing this supreme warrior did in his life was not to continue fighting against the black thunderbolt. Instead, he used all his strength to throw this sword. He still wanted to kill Ah. This sword was too swift and too sudden. No one had expected it. If it weren't for the several supreme mages standing behind him, who felt something was wrong and immediately cast magic to block it, Ah, who was distracted, might have really been killed by Enkidu. The golden ray of light seemed to contain the most brilliant and powerful energy magic in the world. It broke through the obstacles one after another without changing its direction. By the time it reached Ah, it had already lost control, because the person who launched this attack was no longer in this world. The black vortex in the sky was slowly shrinking. Enkidu had been killed, leaving only a few pieces of his scales on the battlefield. Ah groaned and raised his iron staff forward. The golden ray disappeared. It had been absorbed into the magical space carried by Ah's Ventuculum. Then, his vision darkened and he spat out a mouthful of blood. He fainted and was caught by Metatro. Ah's ability had been out of control. From beginning to end, he was lost in thought, trying to figure out what was contained in the black vortex and the thunderbolt. Unknowingly, he had been channeling his magic to protect his mind. He did not realize that his magic power had been consumed to its limit. When he suddenly heard Humbaba's roar, he was already injured. When he channeled magic to absorb the golden ray of light, he actually fainted. When Ah, the commander-in-chief of Igut, woke up, it was already noon the next day. When he opened his eyes from the chaos, he saw a white light slowly scattering down. Turning his head, he saw the 9th-level Supreme Mage Wajhotep casting healing magic on himself, while the other generals of the army were sitting in the room. Ah moved slightly and was surprised to find that his injuries were very strange. His blood vessels were intact, but he could not channel any magic power. When he opened his eyes and moved, the people around him immediately noticed. Someone said in a surprised and anxious tone, "Thank the gods, the commander-in-chief has finally woken up. The Uruk Legion has retreated. I heard that Gilgamesh is also seriously injured. Without the commander-in-chief's orders, we did not pursue them. Now that you are awake, do you want to order the army to pursue the enemy?" Chapter 150. The poor of Duk. The Uruk Corps had quietly retreated last night. The battlefield had been cleaned up, and not a single trace was left behind. When Agang woke up, he did not know the specifics of the situation. When he heard the news, he sat there in a daze for a long time. He had witnessed the death of Enkidu and Gilgamesh's desperate attempt to save him. He could empathize with Gilgamesh's feelings. Gilgamesh's lofty ambitions had dissipated. Disheartened, he left with serious injuries. The generals thought that the commander-in-chief had not recovered from his injuries and was still feeling dizzy. They did not speak for a while. Several supreme mages performed a blessing on him at the same time. In fact, the 4 supreme mages in the army had already taken turns to treat a gang last night. The commander-in-chief's injuries were no longer treatable. He only needed to rest and recover. A gang waved his hand. "Thank you for your hard work, sirs. I'm fine. There's no need to waste any more magic power." He then inquired about the situation of the Uruk Legion's retreat, including what was left in the camp, the formation of the retreat, and how was the army organized. Finally, several orders were issued. The 5 legions of Horus, Isis, Anare, Seth, and Geb, which had been reorganized during the war, were restored to their original formations. The commanders of the 5 legions were ordered to reorganize their formations. At this point, it was clear that the army was in disarray. Other than the weakest Geb legion, which had only suffered minor losses in the final battle, the rest of the legions had lost more than half of their troops after a long battle. While Hardadef was still the head of the Anare Legion, he stayed in Kenmit to recuperate from his injuries. The frontline commander, Hardadef, was seriously injured and had yet to return to the frontline. Gabriel was temporarily appointed to lead the Anare Legion to follow the Uruk Legion's retreat route and send them out of the country. Isis and the Horus Legion flanked the Uruk Legion on the left and right flanks. If a battle broke out, they would converge for a pincer attack. Rod-Dik led the remnants of the Legion of Set and organized the people who had retreated to the rear to return to their homes. The Geb Legion was responsible for providing support to the rest of the army and organizing logistics. A gang's orders were clear. If the Uruk Legion retreated from Igut, there was no need to fight. The Anare Legion followed them out of the country and watched them leave from the desert. Didn't want to fight anymore, and neither did Gilgamesh. In any case, the Uruk Legion would retreat regardless of whether they fought or not. What was the point of adding more casualties? If he was too ruthless, and Gilgamesh regained his composure and launched an enraged counterattack, Igut's losses would outweigh the gains. The Uruk army was only retreating, not fleeing. Dispatched an army to escort the Uruk Legion out of the country, while Rod-Dik sent his men to clean up the lost territory. There was still a lot of work to be done. Then ordered 2 documents to be sent. One was to report the victory to Pharaoh, and the other was to be sent to the Uruk Legion to mourn the death of Enkidu, the #1 warrior of the continent, and also to comfort Gilgamesh. When the clerk heard the commander-in-chief's order, he was shocked. Although he was good at writing, he didn't know how to write this document, so he specifically asked for the commander-in-chief's opinion. No matter who the opponent is, Enkidu sacrificed himself on the battlefield. He is a respectable warrior. If we have such a warrior in our legion, how are you going to write a eulogy? Apart from those praises for the gods, write it however you want. The clerk had a bitter expression, but he didn't dare to ask any more questions. Rod-Dik happened to take over and said, "Commander-in-Chief, leave this matter to me. It won't damage the dignity of you and the empire of Igut, and it will also show the proper magnanimity." Rod-Dik personally wrote a eulogy, praising Enkidu's strength and bravery. He even mentioned the most important achievements in his life. He ordered his men to engrave it on a golden tablet and sent it to the Uruk Legion. Using pure gold to engrave the eulogy was the grandest form of condolence between nobles. When some nobles died, their descendants might be poor, so this kind of condolence was also a form of support. The golden tablet symbolized the ancestors' achievements. Even if they committed a crime and lost their family property, these things would not be confiscated. Some descendants might be too embarrassed to melt the golden tablet and use it, so when they sent the tablet, they would use a golden plate. Even if they kept the golden tablet, the plate would still be worth a lot of gold. Over time, this became the grandest form of condolence between nobles. Some people might use it as a bribe, while others might not want anything from the deceased family and just wanted to express their sincere condolences. Now, Rod Dick was doing this for Ah. Although Enkidu didn't need the gold, he deserved this kind of respect. Ah fought 3 times against Enkidu, but he never won. Each time, he was surrounded by danger. Even though Enkidu was dead, he was still the strongest and most respectable opponent that I had ever met. As for the report that the clerk wrote to Pharaoh, it was naturally voluminous. He even wrote 2 copies in hieroglyphs and secular languages, the content and format slightly different. Under the protection of the great god Horus, the Igut army fought bravely and defeated the powerful Uruk legion. They killed countless enemies and forced the Gilgamesh army to flee. The tyrannical warrior Enkidu died in the wrath of God. The commander-in-chief, Ah, personally went to the front lines and was the first to charge in the decisive battle. His fighting spirit and bravery summoned the gods, who cursed and punished him, killing Enkidu in the battle. Ah was seriously injured, but he persisted in commanding the front lines. He only vomited blood and fainted after victory. In fact, there was no need for the clerk to deliberately announce it. Tens of thousands of soldiers had seen what happened on the battlefield with their own eyes, and all kinds of speculations had already spread in the army. Horus did appear during the battle between Ah and Enkidu. As for the black vortex and the thunderbolt, it should also be a miracle. Ah had used his burning fighting spirit to summon the gods. That was the only explanation. After the 2 battles against the Hittite army and the Uruk legion, Ah's prestige in the Igut army was unparalleled. His name even spread far and wide across the continent. After the 3 battles against the Uruk legion, the commander-in-chief could actually summon the gods and become a military god in the eyes of the Igut army. Especially in a direct force like the Inare legion, Ah's prestige had even surpassed that of the gods. The Uruk legion retreated quickly, leaving the border and crossing the desert back to Uruk city. On the other hand, the Inare legion not only pushed past the border, but also into the middle of the desert before returning. This result was naturally seen by Pharaoh and Lazith II as a great victory. Pharaoh even sent a special envoy to ask if they could take advantage of the Uruk legion's retreat to cross the desert and punish the Uruk legion for their invasion. Fortunately, Pharaoh had only asked and not given a direct order. At least he was not completely out of his mind. The frontline generals unanimously sent a letter to advise Pharaoh to stop while they were ahead. After a long battle, the soldiers were exhausted and in urgent need of recuperation. They could still fight back when the Uruk legion was at their borders, but now that the enemy had been heavily injured and had retreated, they could not launch another expedition in the short term. Not only the frontline generals, but even the ministers around Pharaoh did not agree to continue the expedition. This battle had already saved the face of the empire of Igut. If the expedition failed, it would truly be a huge blow to the national strength. Seeing that there was no support, Pharaoh could not personally go into battle. He could only give up on this idea and order a grand celebration ceremony to be held in Cape States. With the war over, the soldiers were eager to return home. In the month before the Uruk legion retreated to the kingdom of Babylon, was still acting as the commander-in-chief of the battlefield. However, he could not be bothered to manage the affairs anymore. He stayed in Kenmet under the pretext of recuperating from his injuries and did not follow the army to the border. There were plenty of mages in the army, and with Ah's current reputation and status, he could even ask supreme mages to take turns to treat his injuries. However, there was nothing that could be treated for his injuries. He was not sick, nor was he in pain. His body and blood vessels were undamaged. Even the most brilliant of blessings could only make him more awake and healthy. As a supreme warrior, he was already strong enough. However, Ah had lost his strength. It was not the feeling of exhaustion, nor was it the feeling of exhaustion and weakness that came from overexertion of physical strength and spirit. As a supreme warrior, he still maintained a strong physique and agility. His physical strength and endurance were also far beyond that of an ordinary person. As a supreme sorcerer, his senses were much sharper than before, and he could still train as usual. Not only did he not lose the achievements he had made, but he had also become even more profound. The so-called profoundness referred to the fact that Amon, in his daily life, was able to experience the feeling that he had only experienced when meditating. This was the realm that only an 8th-level mage could achieve. Only in this way could he unleash supreme magic instantaneously at will. However, on the other hand, other than sensing abilities like detection magic, could not circulate any magical power. Apart from the power that he possessed, could not communicate with and manipulate the energy between heaven and earth like he usually did. He had lost the magical power that he had always relied on. This feeling was like a baby bird that was used to flying, but had inexplicably lost its wings and could only walk on its own feet. Was very sleepy. All of this happened after Enkidu's death. When the black vortex tore open the sky, his strange sensing ability had been in a state of uncontrollable disorder. He was also too focused on studying everything that was happening on the battlefield, so he had exhausted his magical power and was injured. Now, his injury had healed, but his power had not recovered. Could it be that he had suffered some kind of strange, unknown injury? People said that Enkidu died from the divine punishment of Horus, but I saw more, and of course had more questions. If Horus could kill Enkidu in this way, then when the huge eagle first appeared, it would not have been scattered by Enkidu's sword, and the morale of Igut's army was greatly reduced. Enkidu's last words were to Gilgamesh, "This is not the curse of the gods, but the judgment of fate." Had been thinking about the meaning of these words. Unfortunately, he could not get an answer, and he did not know when his power would recover. Every day, he persisted in practicing magic meditation as usual. He felt that he had broken through a realm, but he could not use his abilities. This situation reminded of his own background, like that of a poor person in Duk. Now, had seen a lot. He was no longer the ignorant boy from the countryside. Recalling the past, he sighed with emotion. The town of Duk used to be the richest place on the continent. Any ragged miner could compare with the rich merchants of the various cities. But even though they had money, they couldn't buy the things they wanted. Sealed in the wilderness, Duk was extremely short of resources. The land was very barren. The merchants could only bring some daily necessities, not luxury. A bottle of wine was dozens of times more expensive than outside. Apart from wine and clothes, there were no other goods. The miners only had a lot of parangons, and they were not allowed to leave without permission. Walked out of Duk, but today, he seemed to have entered a strange cycle, and was faced with the same situation. As the supreme general of the empire, he had received the most generous rewards. He had a large territory, a prestige that could shake the continent, fame and fortune, and wealth. But under this incomparable splendor of glory, he was in the greatest predicament. The strength that supported him until now was not the status and wealth. He had been exploring the path to become a god and unraveling the secrets of the gods. Not long ago, he had confirmed that his attempt was correct. The path was right under his feet. But now, he was faced with a test of the unknown. Once again, felt that he was far from unraveling the secrets of the gods. Enkidu's words to Gilgamesh were also a hint to him. Perhaps it was too early for to think about this problem. At least, he had to get out of the current predicament. The biggest problem he faced was the danger to himself. Although he was high and mighty, he had lost the power to protect himself. Danger lurked everywhere. In the past, was fearless no matter what difficulties he faced. But now, could he still guide his people back to their homeland after losing his power? He could not even protect himself. Did he still have the ability? No matter who it was inevitable that he would overthink in such a situation, and was no exception. Body and mind as one, had experienced the feeling of fusion. It could change a person. Then, at this moment, would he lose his former self? On the night before he was to meet with Pharaoh, was still quietly meditating under the starlight. He looked calm and serene, but his mind was somewhat restless. Felt restless. Even with his eyes closed, he could still feel the flickering stars in the sky. Finally, he sighed and slowly opened his eyes. Then, he saw Schrödinger crouching in front of him. Didn't reach out to hug it. Thinking of this cat's identity as a god, he felt a little awkward. In any case, she was a goddess. He had hugged her in his arms for several years. Schrödinger spoke. Your soul is full of trouble. Did Enkidu's death make you feel frustrated? Sighed. Goliath once said that as a warrior, Enkidu was the most promising existence to surpass mortals. He was so powerful, but he was still destroyed. How could people not be discouraged? After witnessing Enkidu's death, the proud Gilgamesh no longer had the heart to fight. I can understand him very well. Schrödinger said unhurriedly, no one knows what you are thinking and doing better than me. I know all your secrets. You are searching for the path to become a god. Nietzsche and Bell gave you the first guidance, and you finally saw hope in your lonely search. But Enkidu's death was a blow to you. Are you thinking about whether you want to bear the same fate? Silently nodded, yes, I won't hide it from you. Now that I can directly communicate with you through my soul, I'm afraid this is the only ability I have left. I have lost my extraordinary power. The cat tilted its head and looked at him. In a suggestive tone, it said, do you have any questions to ask me? Don't think about it, just say the biggest question in your heart. I'm thinking about Enkidu's last words. What is the judgment of fate? Schrödinger's fur stood up slightly, and his body seemed to tremble. Then he replied, it is the true self you have to face. It can't deceive anyone. It is the choice of fate, the judgment of the end of days. You don't have to think about it. You just need to find your own path. Even if you know it, it will be meaningless. If you understand it too clearly, you will not be able to reach that step. Asked suspiciously, I don't quite understand what you mean. Schrödinger, people are prisoners of life. This is the prisoner's dilemma. If someone told you that not eating is the path to immortality, what would you do? Smiled bitterly, I can't starve to death first. It's meaningless to say that. The cat smiled bitterly like a human. So you don't have to ask. I once hinted to Bell. I believe that Bell hinted to Nietzsche, and Nietzsche should have also hinted to you. You just need to remember what Nietzsche said. The power you practice will have to face today's choice. This is also one of the tests of fate. If you want to become a god, you must first answer a question. Who are you? Is it just the power? Hearing Schrödinger's words, suddenly remembered Crazy Ole's last message in the Taraculus, when you become a supreme sorcerer, you will have unprecedented power. This power is integrated into your body and mind as if you were born with it. But one day, you may face a dilemma, is everything you have you? If so, who is the person who also has everything? Why are you you? If you lose everything, will you also lose yourself? This is my last hint to you. I'm sorry that I can't teach you more. Good luck, child. This was clearly a description of his current situation, and also a hint to him how to face it. Nietzsche's highest achievement in his life was to become an 8th-level sorcerer. Obviously, he had experienced this test. This was also the last hint he could leave to But strangely, in the Temple of Isis's ancient books, there was no such clear record. Closed his eyes and silently pondered for a long time, reflecting on the meaning of Nietzsche's words. Meanwhile, Schrödinger was squatting in front of him, looking at him. When the sky was just beginning to brighten, finally opened his eyes. As usual, he reached out and hugged Schrödinger, stroking his furry back. Thank you. Although I don't know how to restore my power, at least I can calm my soul. Chapter 151. 136. I have 2 requests. Amon finally led the frontline generals back to the main city of Cape States, and once again met the pharaohs of Igut, Lazith II. The governor of Cape States, Rod Dick, had already returned half a month in advance to prepare for a grand celebration. The ceremony was presided over by Pharaoh himself, and the kingdom's high priest, Ricard, was the master of ceremonies. The Supreme General Amon enjoyed the highest honor, and he was only half a step behind Pharaoh, offering sacrifices to Horus side by side. The ceremony was held in the city's shrine, but the real climax was when the ceremonial procession passed through the square and received the cheers of the people. Amon, dressed in shining armor and with a long sword at his waist, walked beside Pharaoh. This was not the attire for battle, but the ceremonial dress worn by the Supreme General for the ceremony. The sword was a special gift from Pharaoh. This was the second time that Amon walked here and heard the cheers of the people. The first time was when he came to return the relics of Nero, and at that time, the people were praising the great god and the wise governor, Rod Dick. This time, the story changed, and the people were praising the gods, Pharaoh, and Amon. Amon was even more famous than the gods and the Pharaoh. He was a young and handsome supreme general of the empire, who had repeatedly made great achievements and returned triumphantly. He was simply an idol in the hearts of men and a fantasy in the dreams of women. Countless eyes were focused on him. Amon heard the people cheering his name. The reverence and worship that came from the bottom of their hearts actually converged into a force. When he used his strange ability, he could clearly feel it. Amon, who had lost his power, inexplicably felt a new kind of power on this occasion, but he did not know how to use it. This was not the magic of a mage, nor was it the martial power of a warrior. It contained too many mysteries and mysteries. He also felt various thoughts between the gates of the underworld. Those were the prayers of the people to the queen of the underworld. Did they also contain such power? The underworld of Anunnaki was the divine realm of Kela. Could it be that the mystery of the so-called divine realm lay in this? Was that a power that only the gods knew how to use? Countless people's thoughts were reflected into Amon's soul, and countless gazes were cast on him. Amon actually felt an indescribable pressure, as if he was walking into another battlefield. He did not want to be so eye-catching, but he had nowhere to hide. When the crowd cheered his name louder than Pharaoh's name, he could clearly feel Lazith-I's displeasure. How could Pharaoh describe his emotions? It was like a child who had his beloved toy snatched away, or a drunkard who saw someone else drinking better wine. Of course, Lazith too would not show his emotions. He walked at the front of the group, wearing a tall golden crown. He was the most dignified king of the continent. Amon glanced at the crowd on both sides and found that many girls were waving their headscarves at him, putting their fingers to their lips and then waving at him crazily, shouting passionate words that made people blush and their hearts beat faster. Amon could only smile bitterly in his heart, and inexplicably, he thought of Gilgamesh again. After Gilgamesh killed Humbaba, he sent some of the snake teeth and tendons to the capital of Babylon, and it was the same scene when he entered the city. At that time, the nobles of Babylon who came to greet him had different attitudes, but the proud hero did not care at all. He just nodded and waved his hand generously, accepting the cheers of the people. Amon didn't have Gilgamesh's style, even though his reputation today was no less than Gilgamesh's. Perhaps it was because of their different attitudes. Gilgamesh was a hereditary governor and the pride of the city since childhood, while Amon had always been a sorcerer, and his mission was to unravel the secrets of the gods, so he was not used to being so ostentatious. The once proud hero, Gilgamesh, had retreated in dejection, but it was Amon who had achieved the glory he had today. When Pharaoh walked to the end of the long stairs, he turned around in front of the majestic gate of the shrine and raised his hand to signal to the people. The cheers reached the climax, like a tsunami. Many people in the square were so excited that their bodies were trembling, and even their voices were hoarse. Amon took another half step back and quietly stood aside, while the generals and priests lined up at the bottom of the stairs. This scene reminded Amon of Goliath, whose reputation in the Hittite kingdom had reached its peak. Whether it was Gilgamesh in the past or Goliath now, Amon's status and glory seemed to be on par with them, but he knew very well that the actual situation was very different. Amon was a foreigner, and his origins were rather unclear. His rise in status was too fast, he was too young, and he had too much prestige in the army. There was no doubt that his meritorious service would overshadow the ruler, which could be seen from the pharaoh's mood just now. Whether it was the king of Hittite or the king of Babylon, even if they were afraid, they could not do anything to Goliath or Gilgamesh. But Amon's situation was different, not to mention that he had lost the power to protect himself. When the ministers of Igut followed Pharaoh into the shrine, the cheers of the crowd remained outside the door, and the majestic and solemn statue of Horus greeted them. The statue of Horus worshipped in the shrine of Cape had the body of a human and the wings of a giant eagle. Amon inexplicably thought of the cloud eagle that Enkidu had killed with one strike. He thought of another thing. Was the power that he felt from the gratitude and reverence of the people just now the so-called power of the gods? Perhaps this was the meaning of the divine realm. The statue standing on the altar was, of course, not Horus himself, but Amon could feel the pressure of being stared at, as if it had some kind of life, as if Horus was here. What was the significance of this statue to the gods? Perhaps this was the answer. Was it necessary to become a god? Was it necessary to stand high above the god's altar? Perhaps, perhaps not. This was not the question that Amon needed to think about, but he could not help but think about it. After the sacrificial ceremony, it was time for a grand banquet. It was as if they had returned to the banquet with the ministers of Hittite in the desert. Many people stood up to toast Pharaoh, and then toasted Amon, praising his achievements. Pharaoh also personally patted Amon's shoulder and said, "Our great general is the true #1 warrior of the continent." The day after the banquet, it was finally time to get down to business. The divisions needed to return to their encampments to recuperate, the soldiers who died in battle needed to be compensated, and the soldiers who made contributions needed to be rewarded. These were important matters that Pharaoh discussed with the ministers, and then handed over to the managers to carry out. In fact, the empire of Igut had not won the last 2 battles. They had fallen into a desperate situation in Hittite, but because of the unexpected reversal of the situation, they succeeded in negotiating peace. As for the battle with the Uruk legion, they had retreated first and then defended. Although they had inflicted heavy losses on the enemy, the Igut army had suffered even more losses, and in the end, the Uruk legion had retreated of their own accord. For the glory of the empire and Pharaoh's face, it could be said that this was a victory for the Igut army. However, they had not gained any advantage in these 2 battles, and it could be said that they had wasted a lot of manpower and resources, but in the end, they had gained nothing. Even so, Lazith too still wanted to reward the entire army according to the victory. Since Pharaoh did not feel the pinch himself, Amon naturally did not have to think about it for him. He asked the commanders to directly submit the list of soldiers who needed to be rewarded to Pharaoh, and the rest of the ordinary rewards and compensation were handed over to the Igut army for handling. As for the NRA legion that he personally led, he naturally did not miss out on any of the meritorious personnel. He had the clerk tally the names of the meritorious personnel in advance. The rewards that Amon nominated were, of course, well-deserved. The quartermaster of the NRA legion, Sio, had finally become a noble as he had wished. Not only that, but because of Amon's special recommendation, he had also become a noble with a title, and was even given a nominal title in the property department of Montefiore. With a title came a fiefdom, but Pharaoh did not directly reward Sio with a fiefdom. He only allowed Sio to buy it with his own money. Of course, Sio could not have asked for more. In the past, he did not have the qualifications to buy a piece of land near Montefiore as his own territory, but now he could. The frontline commander, John, had been demoted to Mount Horeb due to his recklessness, and was later promoted to the NRA Legion by Amon. He had been seriously injured while blocking the Uruk Legion's attack, and had now returned to Montefiore to recuperate. His contributions were not small, and he was promoted 3 times in a row under Amon's recommendation. His status was equivalent to that of the head of the military affairs department of a city. At the same time, Amon requested to resign as the commander-in-chief of the battlefield as well as the head of the NRA Legion, and officially handed over his military power. Pharaoh pretended to persuade Amon to stay, persuading him to still be the head of the NRA Legion, and thanking him for training such an elite division for the empire. Amon's handing over of military power also meant that he was relieved of his burden, so he was naturally determined to resign. So Pharaoh pushed the boat along with the current, and Ammon also retired with honor. Although the Uruk legion had retreated, the dispute in the plains of Duk was obviously not over, and the defense of the Cape States was naturally more important than before. The Legion of Set had to return to their base to regroup, and it was obviously not enough to rely on the original garrisons of the city, so Rod Dick applied to Pharaoh to let the Inare Legion be stationed in the Cape States. Ammon also made the same suggestion to Pharaoh, and recommended John as the successor. Although John was not yet a supreme warrior, his military achievements were outstanding, and he was one of the direct founders of the Legion, so of course it was not a problem to recommend him. Pharaoh agreed to let the Inare Legion be stationed in the Cape States, but he did not reject John's appointment, only saying that it would wait until General John recovered from his injuries before discussing it. There was no need to go into detail about the rewards that the soldiers who followed Ammon had received. When he set out, he had selected 80 personal guards, and after this series of battles, there were only 36 left. These people were specially selected by Madanzo, and they were all commoners with no background and were illiterate. They had followed Ammon through fire and water, and now they had all become nobles. The personal guards were in the nature of a private army, and they were also the guards of the great nobles of the empire when they went out, but their salaries were paid by the empire, and Ammon himself could also subsidize them out of his own pocket. After handing over the military power, it was naturally impossible to maintain a large private army. The 36 people were divided into 3 squads, which was exactly the number of personal guards required by a supreme general of the empire. Ammon prepared to bring them back to his territory. Now that Ammon only had the nominal title of a supreme general, his status was very high, exceeding that of an ordinary governor of a city-state. It was equivalent to the governor of a large city-state like Montefiore, and the high priest of the Temple of Isis. Therefore, the position of the captain of his personal guards was not low, and in terms of rank, it was equivalent to the commander of the garrison of an ordinary city-state. This was something that Ammon could personally appoint. But he did not continue to appoint Madanzo. Madanzo's identity was rather awkward. He was a noble of Babylon, and was in the nature of employment. The Igut army had just fought with the Uruk legion from Babylon some time ago. Before Ammon set out, he did not know that there would be such a battle. Otherwise, he would not have appointed Madanzo as the captain of his personal guards. During the battle with the Uruk legion, he did not let Madanzo lead the charge, but only appeared on the battlefield as his personal guard. After the battle ended, he handed over his military power, and Madanzo naturally left the Igut army. He received a large sum of money, but no other rewards. This did not matter. Ammon allowed Madanzo to temporarily return to his new territory with his personal guards. If the position of the captain of the personal guards was empty, then so be it. He could keep it as a favor in the future. Without further ado, in the meeting hall of Pharaoh's palace, after all the messy affairs had been settled, Pharaoh was about to dismiss the ministers when Ammon stood up, left his seat, and walked to the center of the hall. He knelt before Pharaoh and said, "Your Majesty, Ammon has another request." Pharaoh was startled for a moment, then smiled and said, "Supreme General, please sit down and speak. If you have any requests, feel free to speak." But Ammon did not stand up, and said unhurriedly, "After the meeting with the king of Hittite, you said that if I want any rewards, I can ask for them when I return to Igut. Now, I would like to make a request to your Majesty." This was openly asking for rewards in front of the ministers. Pharaoh had already rewarded Ammon handsomely, and now he wanted to ask for more rewards. Moreover, he was using Pharaoh's words in front of the ministers. It was inevitable that he would be forced to abdicate. But with his meritorious service, it was normal for him to ask for rewards after handing over his military power. No matter what request he made, Pharaoh could not refuse. Lasith too was startled for a moment, then laughed heartily and said, "Ammon, of course you can ask for any reward. Say it, as long as it is within my means." "Ammon, thank you for your approval, your Majesty. You have given me enough rewards, and I do not want to ask for more. It's just that my people, the descendants of the original miners in Duk, are still doing hard labor on Mount Horeb. I hope you can release them and return them their freedom. I'm fighting for the empire for your glory and to save my people. Pharaoh frowned, is that so? Why didn't I know? There was no telling whether Pharaoh really did not know or was just pretending. Aman took out a scroll and held it over his head. Perhaps your majesty can't remember such a trivial matter, but it is very important to me. It was you who personally ordered them to be imprisoned on Mount Horeb. This is the official record. A servant took the scroll and handed it to Pharaoh. Lazith too opened it and glanced at it. He said, I remember now, there is such a thing. Supreme General Aman, I cannot refuse your request. But do you remember the peace treaty we signed with the Hittite kingdom? You are also a witness to the peace treaty by returning their fugitive slaves. Keeping them on Mount Horeb is also a form of protection. Should I return them to the Hittite kingdom? Aman replied calmly, Your Majesty does not need to return them to the Hittite kingdom, because they left Hittite not as slaves, but as fugitives who have lost their homes and nowhere to go. It was the generous and benevolent His Majesty who took them in. I thank you on behalf of my people. Aman seemed to be pressuring Pharaoh. Pharaoh's expression did not look too good. The Minister of the Interior hurriedly interrupted, Supreme General Aman may not know, but they are now Pharaoh's slaves. Although you have made great contributions to the empire, they are only your kinsmen. You cannot grant them freedom just because of your contributions. Aman thought for a moment and said, That's easy. I will ask your majesty to reward me with these slaves. Pharaoh looked at Aman and finally smiled, Of course, it's not a problem. It's just a few dozen slaves. If I am stingy with these rewards, how can the soldiers of Igut trust me? Aman, your kinsmen are now your slaves. You can bring them back to your territory. When the generals in the hall heard Pharaoh reject Aman's initial request, they all showed indignant expressions and wanted to speak up for him. Now that they heard Pharaoh agree to reward these slaves to Aman, they did not say anything. With Aman's contributions, it was only a matter of asking for a few dozen slaves, and they were his kinsmen. This was not a big deal. Aman bowed and said, Thank you for your gift, your majesty. Pharaoh probably felt embarrassed and deliberately asked, Aman, what other requests do you have? Whether it's treasures, beauties, or even more slaves and territory, you can ask. Aman smiled, Since your majesty has said so, I do have a request. I hope you can grant me another territory. He did not expect Aman to really know how to take advantage of the situation. Pharaoh could not take back his words, so he could only ask, Great General, you already have a very large territory. Where else do you fancy? Aman's request was indeed a bit excessive. All the generals looked at him curiously. They didn't know which piece of land the Supreme General had his eyes on. If it was a piece of land with an owner, it would be a little difficult to deal with. Aman calmly took out another sheepskin scroll from his bosom, held it high over his head, and said, I have prepared the map, please have a look, your majesty. Pharaoh picked up the sheepskin scroll presented by the chamberlain, and then said in surprise, The plains of Duk is not in the territory of the empire of Igut. What Aman presented was a map of the plains of Duk. In the area where the town of Duk used to be, he drew an irregular circle with a radius of 200 to 300 miles. It was the most suitable fertile land for living and building a city after surveying the terrain. Aman nodded and said, Yes, I can't be greedy because of my military achievements, and naturally I can't ask for more territory in the empire. But according to the peace treaty between Igut and Hittite, explorers from both countries can enter the plains to find wealth and reclaim the wilderness. I only ask your majesty to grant it to me in name, as for whether I can reclaim it as a territory, it is all up to me. So that's how it is, the officials all showed expressions of relief. This request, Pharaoh had no reason to refuse. For him, it was a favor without any cost, to grant Aman a territory that was not originally in the territory of Igut, and Aman would have to reclaim it himself. Pharaoh looked at Aman thoughtfully and nodded, saying, Well, it seems that you are prepared, then let the Ministry of the Interior issue a document to grant this land to you in the name of a territory, but you need to occupy and reclaim it yourself. Aman thanked him again, then stood up and returned to his seat. He had already prepared these two things in order to get today's matter done, and relied on his military achievements in front of the officials to force Pharaoh to nod his head. Although he only received a nominal fief, it was of great significance to Ammon. Pharaoh refused to release the miners from their status as slaves, and Ammon asked Pharaoh to grant them to himself. This was only the first step. Although Ammon could treat the slaves well in his territory, slaves were, after all, slaves, and Ammon had no right to give them freedom. Once these people escaped from the border, according to the agreement between Igut and Hittite, they would still have to be returned. Although Pharaoh did not gain any advantage in the expedition, he still did not give up on the plains of Duk, and wanted to keep this group of miners in his hands. The descendants of Duk were once the legal owners of that land, but now they were Pharaoh's slaves, and as long as Pharaoh got the title deed, the owner of the slaves would become the owner of that land. Pharaoh had inquired about the whereabouts of the title deed before launching the war, but Moses and the others only said that the title deed had long disappeared in the flood along with Duk. Whether or not there was a title deed was just a pretense, and Pharaoh still launched the expedition. These miners had a more important role. Not only did they master magical skills, but they were also much more efficient at mining parangons than ordinary mages. They were also familiar with the distribution of mineral veins in the area of Duk, which symbolized a living, huge wealth. How could they be sold off so easily? Moreover, now there was a new situation. If they stayed in the empire of Igut, they would be a means to contain Ammon. Ammon had great prestige among the people of Igut, especially among the army, and such a person could not help but make Pharaoh wary. If Ammon was loyal to the empire of Igut, everything would be fine, but if he went to any other country on the continent, it would be a blow to the empire of Igut. Naturally, Pharaoh did not want Ammon to return home with his people. Such a person must be used by Igut, but whether or not he would be used was another matter. It was not a big deal that Pharaoh gave the slaves to Ammon. They were still slaves of the empire of Igut, and being detained in Ammon's territory was not only a kind of kindness, but also a better way to control them. But Ammon was also prepared for this move. He had also asked Pharaoh for an incredible territory, and under such circumstances, Lazith too could not refuse. As the lord of the territory, Ammon could naturally send his slaves to reclaim the land. These two requests seemed unrelated, but it just so happened that Moses and the others could escape the enslavement of Igut and return to their hometown. As for what their status would be after returning to the plains of Duk, it was no longer up to Pharaoh to care. Today's supreme general of the empire was no longer as ignorant as when he first walked out of the town of Duk. Ammon sat in the position of commander-in-chief of the battlefield, and he had dealt with many people from all walks of life. The move of bestowing territory was inspired by a certain experience a long time ago. Princess Sisera of the kingdom of Babylon had bestowed a territory to Usur, the leader of the allied tribe of the giants, but it was not within the borders of the kingdom of Babylon. Ammon had learned this from Princess Sisera, but he had taken the initiative to make a request. He had always been a simple child and never played mind games with others. The first time he played officialdom, he played big, and his opponent was the pharaohs of Igut. Chapter 152. Bring it to Meth. Pharaoh finally returned to the palace when everything at the front line was over. He left Cape in a grand procession of guards and guards, heading west. Pharaoh sat in a huge golden chariot. On the roof of the chariot was not a canopy, but a golden eagle with wings spread out. The craftsmanship of the craftsman was superb, making Lazith too look majestic, like a god descending to the world. Pharaoh's chariot occupied the entire official road, and pedestrians had to stay far away from it. Countless people saw the golden eagle on the roadside, and they all knelt on the ground and kissed the soil. The chariot was double-decker, and Pharaoh sat on the top. He specially invited Ah to ride in the chariot. Ah sat in the front seat of the lower layer, like a symbolic driver, which reminded Ah of Enkidu who drove for Gilgamesh. Where else on the continent could one find a driver who could surpass the fame of Enkidu? Pharaoh let Ah sit in the front of the chariot because he was looking for the feeling of a hero. Pharaoh's first stop on his return to the palace was Montefiore, the capital of Igut, where he would board a ship and sail upstream to Thebes, the capital of Igut. Was 19 years old when he crossed the Nile River again. He was already the Honorable Supreme General of Igut. He was only 17 when he crossed the river for the first time. He was chased by Julian's men and almost lost his life. It was Maria and Gabriel who saved him. And now, Aria had died on the battlefield, in the midst of the army commanded by Ammon. And Enkidu, who had killed him with a single punch, had also died under the mysterious trial of fate, judgment of the end of days. It was said that Enkidu became a 9th-level warrior at the age of 21. Had seen several 9th-level supreme mages, but the only famous 9th-level supreme warrior on the continent today was Enkidu. Abel himself was also a rare genius. He had become a supreme mage and a supreme warrior at the age of 18, and it had been exactly 1 year since then. At that time, he was sent by Maria to the plains of Duk on a reconnaissance mission, and after encountering the Scorpion King and the two-headed snake monster, he finally crossed the inland lake and set foot on the land of his hometown, attaining the 7th level. But now, he had become the famous General Igut, sitting majestically in front of Pharaoh and returning to Montefiore. But he had lost all his power, and the memories of the past seemed like a lifetime ago. Of course, they had to take a boat to cross the river. Page Yen stood on the bow of the boat on the 2nd floor, while Pharaoh sat on the balcony of the cabin on the 3rd floor. From a distance, he could see Holy Envy Maria leading the subjects of Igut to welcome them at the pier. Ah's eyesight was excellent, and he could see Maria's face clearly in the middle of the river. She wore a golden crown on her head and held a staff in her hand, exuding an invisible divine brilliance, but her face was so beautiful, and her delicate figure stood on the misty bank of the Nile, like a dream. Of course, Pharaoh also saw Maria, but he did not have as good eyesight as Ah. He gave an order, and a court mage placed a magic artifact in front of him, and the light and shadow it emitted was like a mirror, clearly showing the situation on the shore. Pharaoh whispered to the voice beside him, "This Holy Envy is so young, but she is already a supreme mage. The gods have given her such amazing beauty, no one in my harem can compare to her." The voice laughed and said, "Your Majesty has taken a fancy to the Holy Envy?" Pharaoh laughed twice and said, "I'm just saying, the guardian Holy Envy of the Temple of Isis, after all, represents me, and symbolizes the protection of the gods to the Igut. I'm just a little puzzled. The goddess of Isis is also married, her husband is the first king of the empire of Igut, Pharaoh Osiris, and he also gave birth to a son, Horus, who became the king of the empire. Why can't the guardian Holy Envy of Isis be touched by men?" The voice laughed and said, "The Holy Envy of the Temple of Isis is also the Holy Envy of your Majesty, and symbolizes that your Majesty has the authority of the gods to rule the Igut. You are the spokesperson of the great Horus, and she is the guardian Holy Envy of Isis, and nominally also the woman of your Majesty." Pharaoh laughed and said, "That's true. Seeing this Holy Envy, I really feel a little sorry for the tradition of the Temple of Isis." The voice added, "If your Majesty really has any ideas, you can secretly pass a message. Your words represent the oracle of the Igut, and the Holy Envy also has to obey the call of the gods." Maybe, this was a joke between the pharaoh and his favorite ministers. Naturally, it was not as serious as it was usually in the court, and there was no need to hide anything. Their voices were very low, and the whole ship was protected by a magic formation, so they were not worried about being heard by outsiders. But Ah was standing under the balcony, and his hearing was excellent, so he heard everything clearly. Hearing Pharaoh's unscrupulous joke, an inexplicable impulsive anger rose in Ah's heart. He almost couldn't resist the urge to jump up and punch Lazith II in the nose. This impulse was like a desire, as if he had returned to a long time ago, when Crazy Ol had awakened the power of two sides, and when he saw the repulsive priest Shog in the town, he also had the same feeling. No matter how repulsive Shog was, he had died in the flood. Ah's memory of that time used to be ridiculous. But now this feeling was awakened again, and it seemed so real. Ol couldn't help but straighten his body, his hand on the hilt of his sword. He really wanted to beat Pharaoh, but he could only stand there without moving. He asked himself in his heart, is this rationality or cowardice? Why am I standing still? Is it because I am afraid of Pharaoh's power, or because I have lost my power? If the person behind me who is talking nonsense is not Pharaoh, then who is he? And what will I do? While Pharaoh was talking and laughing with the servant, he suddenly heard Ol cough heavily from below. The hilt of the sword in his hand knocked on the armor, making a crisp sound. He was startled and stood up, asking, General what's wrong? Ol turned around and replied coldly, Your Majesty, please conduct yourself with dignity. Pharaoh was startled, realizing that had heard his words. The servant beside him also paled, wanting to scold but not daring to open his mouth. If anyone else had heard Pharaoh's joke, they would have pretended to be deaf and mute. He didn't expect the general to not give him face, and actually scolded him in front of his face. This put Pharaoh in a difficult position. The atmosphere was a little awkward, but Pharaoh immediately laughed and said, I was joking and spoke without thinking. Thank you for the reminder, General. You are the pillar of the empire, and I admire you for your frankness. This sentence resolved the awkwardness, but still pointed at the servant and said, Your Majesty, this kind of person is blasphemous to you. It was hard to tell if Pharaoh's face was red or white. He coughed and said to the servant, Did you hear that? Go down and slap yourself. Then he turned to and said with a smile, You are really a dignified general. How should I reward you for your frank advice today? Pharaoh's words sounded like a reward, but in fact, it was a rebuke. The servant had already retreated according to order and slapped himself. Should know when to stop. Ol didn't expect Ol to take advantage of the situation. He pointed at the divine artifact in front of Pharaoh and said, I have also experienced the second awakening of my power, and I am very familiar with divine arts. Your Majesty, this artifact is very magical, can you give it to me? Oh, so he wants this thing. The Pharaoh waved his hand generously and said, Men, bestow this black eye mirror to General Ching expressed his gratitude and received the disc-shaped magic tool. After the artifact's light faded, it became a mirror the size of his palm. He put it into his bosom, then turned around and continued to stand solemnly at the bow of the ship. Pharaoh looked at us back and his heart was in turmoil. Dared to talk back to him and even directly asked for a precious artifact. He shouldn't have any ulterior motives. People with ulterior motives usually wouldn't go against their superiors so straightforwardly. But on the other hand, this general is really arrogant. It is necessary to cut off his military power to dampen his spirit. Otherwise, it will be hard to control him in the future. From a bystander's point of view, should bear with it. There is no need to offend Pharaoh over such a small matter. But only said what he wanted to say and reminded Pharaoh to behave himself. He also took away the artifact that Pharaoh used to spy on Maria. The fleet slowly sailed across the Nile River. General and the ministers surrounded Pharaoh and went ashore. Maria led the crowd to welcome them. Lazith too went to the temporary imperial residence in Montefiore to listen to Igut's military and political reports before continuing his journey. They only stayed in Montefiore for 2 days. Pharaoh came to the temporary imperial residence, and the officials were busy with various things. Also didn't have the opportunity to meet with Maria alone. He was an honorary warrior of the Temple of Isis. Now that he had made the greatest contribution on the battlefield, he naturally had a lot of situations to deal with. His temporary residence was filled with an endless stream of congratulatory guests. Ordinary guests were dealt with by the servants, and important guests had to be personally received. He received a lot of valuable congratulatory gifts. The Holy Lady didn't come to congratulate him. She only sent messengers to encourage and reward him. This was normal etiquette. The wealthy merchant of Montefiore, Scio, was personally appointed by as a quartermaster. Not only did he make a fortune during the war, but he also received the title of nobility. Naturally, he was very grateful to The gifts he sent were extremely valuable, even more than the gifts from the Lord of Montefiore. But the most valuable gift didn't come from the lords of Igut. Instead, it came from Princess Issy of the Kingdom of Babylon, who specially sent a messenger to Montefiore. The Kingdom of Babylon and the Empire of Igut had just finished their war, and Princess Issy actually came to send a gift. Her reaction was too fast. She sent the gift in the name of a human to express her respect to General Ah. But with their status, it was also a symbol of submission. Princess Issy's gift caused a great sensation. It turned out to be Humbaba's 4 tusks and a piece of snake tendon. Along with the gift was a congratulatory letter. It wasn't a secret letter, but a public one. The letter praised Ah's achievements and fearless spirit, and thanked him for saving her life in the past. The last part was a pile of blessings and words of admiration. Princess Issy naturally had a reason for sending these gifts. Ah had personally asked her for them. In the town of Arcade in the Kingdom of Babylon, after rescuing the kidnapped Princess Issy from a highland tribe, Her Royal Highness asked him what he wanted as thanks. At that time, Ah replied, "Not long ago, I went to King's City and saw your fiancé, Gilgamesh, entering the city with gifts. He gave you 3 pieces of Humbaba's snake tendon and 12 tusks. It is said that they are the best weapons for warriors. If there is a day in the future when I can do more for you, I hope to receive a piece of snake tendon and a tusk." Princess Issy's reply was very interesting. "I agree to your request. If there is a day in the future when you can be thanked for your actions, I will give you a piece of Humbaba's snake tendon and tusk. I will also explain to Gilgamesh what happened." Now that Ahmet had become the commander-in-chief of the Egyptian army, his personal guard captain was Metatro. Countless people in the Uruk Legion had seen their faces, so it was impossible for the news not to reach Princess Lilith. She should also know who they were. There was no need for Ah to say anything more. She took the initiative to deliver the gifts, and not just 1, but 4 tusks and a complete set of tusks from each of Humbaba's heads. Since Ah could send a letter to mourn for Enkidu and praise his achievements, Princess Issy could naturally write a letter to express her admiration for Ah, even though they were once enemies. The contents of the letter were made public halfway through the journey, and it spread throughout Montefiore in no time. Pharaoh and the other lords were very interested, and specially came to see Humbaba's tusk and snake tendon. They even asked Princess Issy about the life-saving grace mentioned in the letter. Ah could only explain that when he was still a hunter in the mountains, he encountered Princess Issy being kidnapped by a tribe of giants, and joined the local rescue team. At that time, he had not yet arrived at Igut, and he did not know what happened later. The ministers laughed, especially the generals who had fought under Ah's command. Their laughter was especially unbridled, and when they thought of the words in Princess Issy's letter, they found that there was some ambiguity. Pharaoh teased, "I heard that as soon as Gilgamesh returned to Uruk, he sent an envoy to the capital to cancel his engagement with Princess Issy. Our great general Ah defeated the strongest hero of the Babylon kingdom, and won the heart of the princess. I fought against the Hittite kingdom, and in the end, I married the princess of Hittite. Now, great general Ah fought against the army of the Babylon kingdom, and won the admiration of the enemy princess. Great general, why don't you just send an envoy to the Babylon kingdom to propose? I heard that Princess Issy is also a famous beauty. You should have seen her, right? Marry the princess of Babylon to Igut as well." The crowd burst into laughter again, and Ah could not help but wipe his sweat. He could only smile bitterly and say, "I'm just a warrior. After the war, I just want to retire and live a peaceful and leisurely life. Your Majesty, please don't make fun of me." Princess Qian's gift and the letter did not only add to Ah's glory, but also pushed Ah's reputation to a new level. The commoners loved to spread such gossip, and the more they exaggerated it, the more exaggerated it became. Ah became a legendary hero, and in some people's exaggerated discussions, he was even vaguely comparable to the pharaohs or the gods. This was not a good thing. On the surface, Ah seemed to be full of glory, but he shivered as if he was lonely at the top. He was now just a warrior who had lost his military power and strength. Being so eye-catching would also cause him to be hated. Princess Issi's words were also like roasting him on a fire, but it was even more brilliant than the king of Hittite praising him as the greatest warrior in the continent. Could only express his gratitude. In addition to Humbaba's snake teeth and tendons, when Princess Issi's messenger passed by Uruk, someone asked him to deliver another item to To everyone's surprise, it was the divine bow that Gilgamesh had used on the battlefield. This hero had actually given his invincible bow to his enemy. Gilgamesh did not write a letter, but only asked the messenger to convey his gratitude for mourning for Enkidu. Those in the know tried to guess Gilgamesh's intentions. Some said it was a sign of submission to and that he had admitted defeat. Others said it was a declaration of war, and that he would get revenge sooner or later. Some went further, saying that Princess Issi was jealous of Gilgamesh and challenged to a duel. Only Faye could understand the complicated meaning behind this gift. Gilgamesh was still as arrogant as ever. His temperament did not change, but his heart had changed. He no longer pursued the achievements of a hero and wanted to live in seclusion. Breaking off the engagement with Princess Shalebi and giving the bow to Faye was a symbol of silence. This bow was a mourning for Enkidu, a reflection on fate, and an encouragement or warning to did not say anything else. He packed up the things and returned to his territory with a large pile of treasures. His newly acquired fief was on the outskirts of Herak, the closest bank to Mount Horeb, by the Nile River. Pharaoh's fleet was passing by there, and it just so happened that they were escorting home. Wanted to use recuperation as an excuse to stay in Montefiore. There was already a manor here that he had bought under an alias. With his status as an unemployed person, it was convenient for him to do anything now that no one could control him. There was another reason he wanted to stay in Montefiore. Maria was also here, and he would eventually have the chance to meet her alone. Even if it was just to sit face to face and chat about family matters, it would be good. But Pharaoh did not give him this opportunity. He still ordered to set off with his fleet. Since the Supreme General himself said that he needed to recuperate, Pharaoh, in order to express his concern, ordered the guards to send him back to his territory. He also reminded to recuperate well and not to leave without orders. He also told to wait for the empire's conscription at any time. There was an even more glorious mission waiting for him, and so on. Although it was said cordially, it was in fact an order and a warning. Had left his territory without permission, and he had to report to Pharaoh. This was a treatment that influential ministers could only receive when they retired. Was still young, and Pharaoh had already asked him to return to his hometown to retire. Unless the empire of Igut was invaded by a powerful foreign enemy, it would be very difficult for him to have another chance to leave his mountain. Returned directly to his territory, and Madanzo had already arrived with 36 guards. They had tidied up the manor. Chapter 153. The key of fate. According to normal procedure, they should have waited for Pharaoh's order to be delivered to Mount Horeb, and then Mount Horeb would send someone to deliver the slaves to territory. But Great General did not do this. Instead, he sent his personal guards to take the slaves away on the spot. He was also afraid that a long delay would bring trouble. If someone were to interfere and cause any accidents to happen to the slaves, would not be able to hold them accountable. The commander of Mount Horeb, Paera, had not yet received Pharaoh's order when personal guard arrived. Paera was put in a difficult position and wanted to wait for Pharaoh's order to arrive first. But the personal guard did not buy it. He pressed his hand on the hilt of his sword and said, "Is the order of the imperial great general not an order? I will take the slaves away first. You can report to your superiors later." Pharaoh has already agreed to it. Can it be false? This personal guard had risked his life in an army of 10,000, and his killing intent was frightening. He only followed orders and would not listen to anyone else. Since he had come, he had to complete the mission. Paera could not argue. Prestige was unparalleled, and he could not afford to offend him. Thus, he sent Moses and the others to territory, and to prevent any accidents, he even sent a personal guard to escort them. Even if there were any problems with this, he would let Ah bear the consequences himself. In any case, he was the one who had forcibly taken the slaves. Although Ah did not have any real power, his status was still there. Just as Aristotle had said, in his position, he could plan, and he could exercise his power. In the past, when he was flipping through the divine texts in the archives of the Temple of Isis, he had to be careful not to be discovered. Schrödinger had given him 2 records, one of which was the land of Marduk, and the other was a secret book of the highest level, but he had never found a chance to look at it. But now, after writing down the serial number, he directly sent a personal guard to get the Temple of Isis to retrieve the book and send it to his territory. He didn't even bother to explain. This was the difference in status. The territory of the Empire of Igut was vast. The human population was distributed along the Nile River, mainly in the upper and lower Igut. In the center of the empire, only the narrow tidal flats on both sides of the Nile River could be used for farming. Further east and west was a vast expanse of wasteland. Deserts and barren mountains were scattered all over the place. There were only a few small towns and scattered villages, as well as a few nomadic tribes. Places far away from human habitation were also places where a lot of monsters appeared. Ah's territory was vast. In the southern outskirts of Herak, it included the seasonal flooding of the riverbank, which could only be used for farming for one season. There were also farms not far from the riverbank that could be irrigated, and there was also a large grassy slope at the foot of the mountain on the west bank that could be used for grazing. Further west of the grassy slope, there was an uninhabited barren mountain range within Ah's territory. That was where the Supreme General usually went hunting. The land bestowed by the empire was different from the land bestowed by the empire. The people living in this land were all servants of Azimi, and every year, they had to work for Azimi for 3 months without pay. If they did not wish to serve, they would have to pay a corresponding fee. On the other hand, could not casually transfer or gift this territory to others. He could only receive the profits from this territory, and the rights to dispose of the territory remained in the hands of the empire. However, Ah's descendants could inherit the ownership of the territory. Apart from the residents of the territory, Ah also had his own servants, including his personal guards, slaves and hired servants. They lived in a very large manner. There were a total of 60 Dushans in the town of Duk. More than 40 of them were young miners, while the rest were once servants of Moses. Now, they had all become slaves given to Ahi by the pharaoh. They had been brought here from Mount Horeb, and their hearts were filled with apprehension. They had already heard that Ah had become the supreme general of the empire, and had led the Igut army to defeat the kingdom of Hittite and the kingdom of Babylon. He had made great contributions, and had requested Pharaoh to grant him the Dushans as slaves. Ah had been to Mount Horeb a year and a half ago. Since then, the living conditions of the miners had improved a lot. They were no longer abused, beaten or scolded. However, slaves were still slaves, and they had not escaped the fate of being enslaved. Ah was a man exiled from Duk, but he had achieved so much in the Igut army. Now that his former clansmen had become his slaves, how would he treat them? Moses had another worry in his heart. Under the guidance of Allah, he had been secretly preparing to return to his homeland. But a year and a half had passed, and there had been no news of the god. Now that such a change had occurred, it seemed that the tragic fate of his clansmen was uncertain. Ah brought them to his territory. He did not make things difficult for them, but he did not give them any special treatment either. After all, Moses and the others were slaves. Even if they were to eat with Ah, it would not be in accordance with the etiquette. Ah did not let them live in the manor, nor did he give them houses. Instead, he sent his guards to set up a row of tents on the grassy slope at the foot of the mountain, at the edge of the farm, for the time being. Then, he summoned everyone. When Moses and the others saw Ah, they all knelt down to pay their respects. Ah raised his hand to stop them. This is a human occasion. You are all my clansmen. Some formalities can be waived. I had asked the pharaoh to give you freedom, but he did not succeed. So, I brought you here. Now that you are in my territory, if you have any requests, you can tell me now. One of the women, who was Moses's former female servant, weakly said, "Winter has just passed, the weather is still very cold. Can you give us houses to live in? Even if it is just a stone house like Mount Horeb." Ah smiled, "The tents you are living in now are the ones I used to live in. They should be able to withstand the cold. You will have houses, but you will need to build them yourself. In my territory, you can go up the mountain to cut wood, mine stones, and build your own village. The day is almost here. There is a large area of land at the foot of the mountain that can be cultivated. You can use the water from the Nile River to irrigate it. Whether it is seeds or farming tools, you can ask my steward for them." Ah did not provide everything ready-made for the clansmen, but let them build houses and cultivate the land themselves. There are wild beasts in the mountains. They can hunt, but they also need to protect themselves. Some of the clansmen were disappointed, but did not say anything. Moses saluted, "Thank you, great general. Thank you for everything you have done for us. But we have a common wish, we have always wanted to return to our hometown. I heard that it has become a fertile land in the wilderness." Ah replied, "Even if you return there, you will still have to rebuild your home. Why not start preparing now? Don't worry, if possible, I will try my best to satisfy your wish, but you still need to wait for the right time." Ah only provided supplies, not ready-made things for the clansmen. Everything had to be obtained by themselves. Even if Moses and the others could return to the plains of Duk in the future, they would have to start from scratch and could not rely on others. From then on, he did not see the clansmen again, as if deliberately keeping a distance from them. This situation was normal. Why would a high and mighty great general be close to a group of slaves? The Duk clansmen's new life began. They were the best craftsmen on the continent. After getting the tools, they cut wood nearby, and in 2 or 3 days, they built a wooden house enough for everyone to live in. Then Moses commanded the strong laborers to go to the nearby mountains to mine stone and transport it back to the camp. He began to build a permanent solid courtyard, completely according to the plan of a large-scale village, and even left a place for the shrine. Someone asked Moses, "This is not our home, why do we have to build it so well?" Moses replied, "My father once told me that the body is the courtyard where the soul resides, and the place where the soul stands is the home of the body and mind. If the body and mind lose their support, not knowing where the soul is, not knowing what they are pursuing, then they are truly homeless. We still don't know how long we will stay here, so why not build a good residence? Even if we return to Duk, we will still need to do the same." Some people were dissatisfied with Ah, and once complained in front of Moses, "Ah is now famous in Igut, and has endless wealth, but he refuses to give us anything, and instead makes our clansmen build villages and cultivate the wilderness for him. We are all his slaves. Everything we build is not our own, it's all us." Moses replied with a smile, "The achievements of the Supreme General belong to him, not you or me. You complain that he doesn't give you more, but have you ever thought about what he owes you? Ah is the son of an old drunkard, and he must have been bullied a lot since he was a child, and he was forced to leave Duk. Now that we are his slaves, we should thank the gods that he didn't mistreat us. This is Ah's territory, but it's also our own house and land. If you want to live a better life, you have to do it yourself." When Moses led his clansmen to build a new home, he had been eagerly looking forward to the long-awaited moment, hoping that Allah's emissary would arrive as soon as possible. This was the real hope that supported him to do all this. Moses himself was taught the power of 2 sides, and now he was a 6th-level sorcerer and 6th-level warrior. If he wanted to escape by himself, it was entirely possible. Professor Ah's method of teaching Moses was different from others. He only asked Moses to train in basic strength, and only to pursue a breakthrough in the realm. He did not involve any specific magic or martial arts. Even so, with Moses's current achievements, as long as he paid attention to his identity, he could escape to anywhere he wanted. But what was the point of escaping by himself? Professor Ah had been secretly observing the actions of Moses and his clansmen. When the Duk clansmen finished building their wooden houses and began to mine stones and reclaim the wasteland, he finally decided to summon Moses again. But there was one inconvenience. Had lost his magic power and could not use magic, so he assigned this task to Madanzo. That night, Moses, who had been working all day, was meditating in his wooden house. He had broken through the test of limit breakthrough, and had achieved the 6th level of the power of 2 sides. Although he had not learned any specific magic, his magic power was already very strong, and he had naturally mastered many laws of power. Some simple magic techniques could be mastered by himself without learning them. But he had always remembered Allah's warning, to only concentrate on training and not use them. The work during the day was nothing to him. If it was necessary, he could do it even if he didn't sleep or rest for more than 10 days. Moreover, he never stopped meditating every night. Only in this way could he see the hope of life in the midst of suffering. Just then, a voice like the hum of a mosquito entered his ears. "Moses, I am the emissary sent by God. Quietly leave the village and meet me on the slope to the west. I have something to ask you." Moses almost jumped up from his seat. His heart was filled with ecstasy. The day he had been waiting for had finally come. It seemed that God Allah had not forgotten him, and had always been silently watching him and his people. He hurriedly put on his clothes, and did not forget to dust his hair and clothes before leaving. He tidied up his appearance and quietly left the camp. He walked across the grassy slope and ran towards the mountain to the west. The mountain here was not high, but it was very steep. There were many places covered with rocks, and this was where Moses and his people mined for stone. Ahead of him, there was a little light like a firefly guiding him. Moses walked past the stone quarry, climbed over the cliff, and came to a high slope. In front of him stood a man in a cloak, holding a branch in his hand. Even with Moses's current eyesight, he could not see the man's face clearly. But under the starlight, he could clearly see the thing in the man's hand. It was the staff that Allah once used. He hurriedly knelt on the ground. "Emissary of God, is it you who summoned me?" Madanzo nodded and said, "Yes, I'm here on God's order to see how you and your people are preparing." Moses was so excited that he was about to cry. "Thank God, Allah has not forgotten me, and has always been watching us." Madanzo's tone sank. "Have you forgotten? You can't pray to other gods. In that case, please do not call Allah by his name in front of me or anyone else. He is your only God. This is true piety, fusing it with your faith." Madanzo's words were very interesting. Moses could summon other gods, but he could not directly call Allah by his name, because he could not pray to other gods. So when he mentioned gods, he was referring to Allah and not the other gods in the world. From this moment onwards, the word God had a specific meaning. Madanzo asked Moses many questions, including how his training was over the past 1.5 years, and what preparations he had guided his people to make. Moses respectfully answered all of them in detail. Moses had the highest level of training amongst his people, and had already attained the 6th level of the power of 2 sides. He even secretly spread the miracles of Allah, telling everyone that this God would guide them back to their homeland. Furthermore, Moses had awakened the power of 2 sides for 12 of his people. As of now, all of them had achieved the intermediate level, and were at least 4th-level magicians and warriors. Even without special reminders, the people knew that this was a secret that could not be divulged. Even the slightest hint of it would bring them a calamity of death. So everything was done in secret. On Mount Horeb, they had to do heavy labor every day, so it was difficult for them to make more preparations. They could only instill hope and faith in their people, and let them protect themselves well. As for the miners who had not awakened the power of 2 sides, they also had to diligently practice the mining skills of Duk. It was not only to mine parangons for the empire of Igut, but also to strengthen their bodies and minds. Madanzo nodded with satisfaction. "From today onwards, you will come here every night. I will teach you magic and martial arts, and you will pass them on to those who are willing to learn. When training, you must be careful. Don't let anyone find out. Take this staff and disguise it. It is both a weapon and a staff. The god has allowed you to use it temporarily. Adu gave the staff to Moses. Except for the god's tear, there were still 4 parangons embedded in it, the Taraculus, the Aquaticor, the Ventuscum, and the Spirit of Flame. Adu did not tell Moses the secret of the staff, but only told him that it was for Moses to use. The Taraculus was not the one crazy Ol used to record information on, and the Ventuscum was not the original spatial artifact either. Adu had replaced it with a new one. Now that Adu had lost his power, he could not even use spatial artifacts, so the staff was idle. As a slave, Moses could not openly take out a weapon, let alone a staff. Although Adu had many things in his hands, this branch was the only suitable one. He wrapped it in a cloth strip, and no one would be able to see through it. To cover up, Moses ordered each of his people to chop a similar branch and wrap it in a cloth strip to make a staff. In this way, Medanzo taught Moses all kinds of magic and martial arts secrets every night. After a simple demonstration, he let Moses practice on his own and teach them to his people. Back when they were on Mount Horeb, it was not convenient to teach them these things. But now, they could do it in Adi's territory. There was an uninhabited valley near the quarry, and they could practice on their own without anyone interfering. Moses was very smart, and this was also due to the good education he had received from his mother and the tempering he had experienced in the past few years. After a dozen days, Metatro had taught almost everything he needed to. The remaining skills could only be mastered by Moses and the others, so he went back to report to Ah. In the manner, Medanzo was surprised and sighed, "Are all your people geniuses, Ah God? 12 out of 60 have awakened the power of 2 sides. In just a year and a half, all of them have achieved the intermediate level. Especially that Moses, as long as he has the opportunity, I think he has a chance to break through to the 7th level. This is much faster than I did when I was young." Adu was not surprised. He explained with a faint smile, "You only see these people, so you are surprised. But have you ever thought about how many generations of cruel elimination have they accumulated? The mining skills of Duk have been passed down from generation to generation. A long time ago, the living environment there was much more dangerous. If an adult man could not master the skills, it would be difficult for him to survive there. Many people died prematurely, and the population has hardly increased for hundreds of years. The selection and elimination of the environment are cruel and merciless. These descendants have inherited the most powerful power in their blood, the essence of many years of accumulation. If not for that, do you think they would still be able to live healthily after going through so many hardships? As for the 12 people, you only think about their training in the past year and a half, but they have been learning the mining skills of Duk since they were 16 years old. This is also the foundation of the power of 2 sides. Except for Moses, they have been training longer than you and I, but no one has opened the real door. Even so, they have not surpassed your achievements and speed of training. You and I are already miracles in the eyes of ordinary people, but think about Enkidu. He became a 9th-level supreme warrior at the age of 21. What kind of existence is he? Medanzo chuckled, "I'm not comparing them like that. I just think that their speed of training is really amazing, not just one person, but a group of people." Your explanation makes sense, but the training of the power of 2 sides has its own rules. It is not just about hard work, but also through various tests. Adu smiled faintly, "They are more suitable to train in this power than ordinary mages, especially Moses. Losing their homes, living in a foreign land, doing hard labor every day, but not giving up the hope in their hearts. Which noble mage has ever experienced this kind of hardship? Don't forget, on the continent, only nobles can practice magic, and slaves can't practice body arts. It is difficult for ordinary warriors to endure such hardships, but they have survived. This is an achievement." Since Moses and the others had not given up hope and were making preparations, Adu sent Medanzo to the plains of Duk to see how Link's preparations were going. Before leaving, he gave the spatial artifact, Ventuselv, to Madanzo, and asked Madanzo to take out a few things from it, including the somewhat damaged scorpion shell armor, a flying shuttle, and a golden spear. The spear was more than 10 feet long, and was different from ordinary spears. It was like a very slender droplet of liquid, and it was impossible to tell what material it was made of. Even with the eyesight of a master craftsman, he could not completely understand the method of making it. Adu gave the spear to Madanzo and said, "You have always envied me for having a magical staff that can be used as a weapon. The sword I gave you last time has been destroyed in the battle with Enkidu, and this spear is even more magical than my iron branch staff." Madanzo took the spear and tested it. He was surprised. "Adu, where did you get such a magical artifact? It is almost indestructible, and the best staff I have ever seen. Did you make it yourself? What is its name?" Adu sighed and said, "I did not make it myself. I call it the Key of Fate. You have seen it before, and you have even fought a life and death duel with the owner of this weapon." Madanzo was at a loss. "Impossible, I have never seen such a magical weapon, let alone duel with the owner of it." Adu explained, "You just don't recognize it. It was once the broadsword in Enkidu's hand. When it slashed at the cloud eagle in the sky, it became damaged. In the final battle, Enkidu fought with the black thunderbolt from the sky. The sword turned into a golden mist, and even the blade changed shape. At the last moment when Enkidu rushed into the sky, he pointed the sword in his hand at me. I received it into the Ventusolve, and it became this spear." Madanzo held the Key of Fate in his hand and exclaimed, "So it was Enkidu's broken sword. He infused all of his strength in his life, and after being refined by the black vortex, it became like this. As expected, it is not something a human craftsman can make." Chapter 154. I solemnly recommend a book about the death of Enkidu and the Key of Fate. Many readers should be very clear that many of the relevant plots and characters in this book refer to the Mesopotamian myths such as Gilgamesh and the Bible. However, they are explained and deconstructed in a different way. In War of the Gods, the high point is the death of Enkidu. As for the Judgment of Fate and Judgment of Armageddon, mentioned by Schrödinger in the book, what is that all about? Naturally, there will be an explanation later in the book, but that mystery can only be solved when I becomes a real god. I'm afraid that there will be a very long story. For readers who have questions about this, I recommend another book. It is the completed version of Spiritual Mountain that I wrote myself. It is the book with the worst performance in subscriptions other than Ghost Shares, but it is also the book that I am most satisfied with. Spiritual Mountain elaborates on the concept of heaven's punishment, which can also explain the death of Enkidu. Also, the Key of Fate, a holy object that has just appeared in Dubhi, is also an important artifact in Spiritual Mountain. Some people may not be used to the style of Dubhi, so I recommend you to read Spiritual Mountain. I can guarantee that from the style of writing to the overall structure, there is probably no more authentic China classical chapter-style xianxia novel in web literature. I am only referring to the web literature that has become popular in the past 10 years. As for whether it is true or not, you can decide after you read it. Many people often post questions in the book review section, asking me which book I wrote should be read first, or in what order should I read it. There are also many enthusiastic readers who have asked me all kinds of questions. I have seen it many times, so I will reply here. All of my books, including Astral Wander, Ghost Shares, Human Spiritual Mountain, Earth Master as well as the currently updated Dubhi, there is no order in reading. You can just read any book, or start from any book and read it in any order. There is no such thing as reading which book you should read first. Some people may not like all of them, so just pick what you like. My idea is the same. Every book was an independent piece, and the writing style and theme were all different. There was no problem reading it alone. Of course, if you read one book and then read another, you might find it more interesting. There was no order to reading, only the joy of discovering the differences in depth with the overall theme. Let me give you an inappropriate example. For example, between Water Margin and Jean Ping Mei, you can read either of them alone. You can read either one and then read the other. It might be more interesting. Ha ha ha. That's why I'm recommending Spiritual Mountain today. The above is a recommendation for new readers. Old readers who have read Spiritual Mountain need not be disappointed. They can wait for Dubhe to be updated every day and develop new plots. Chapter 155. Life or Death. Madanzo steered the shuttle away from Ahmed's territory. It was much faster than riding a horse. Ahmad reminded him to be careful on the way, and to avoid densely populated cities. A few days later, the guards sent to the Temple of Isis should have returned by now, but he was nowhere to be seen. Ahmad was puzzled. The highest authority in the Temple of Isis was the Holy Lady, and the one in charge of all the books and documents was High Priest George. Only these two could deny his request. Was the book really so important that Maria or George wouldn't let him borrow it? Regardless of whether it was public or private, the possibility of that happening was extremely small. Ahmad was about to send someone to the Temple of Isis to urge them, but the messenger from the Temple of Isis arrived at that moment. To his surprise, it was High Priest George who personally delivered the book. What surprised him even more was that George also brought a message and a person. The message was about the Kingdom of Babylon and the Hittite Kingdom. The two countries had started a war not long ago, and the Hittite Kingdom had suddenly retreated despite having the upper hand. This was because of the death of their king Lusir. At the same time that Gilgamesh invaded the empire of Igut, the elite Marduk Legion of the Kingdom of Babylon and the Kish Legion of the Kingdom of Kish had assembled at the crossings of the middle reaches of the Euphrates River. When the Uruk Legion advanced into the territory of the Igut and occupied a large area of the Cape States, the Marduk Legion and the Kish Legion took the opportunity to cross the Euphrates River and approach the plains of Duk. The army of the Kingdom of Babylon was stationed at the northeast corner of the Saya Desert and the southeast corner of the inland lake, waiting for news from the Uruk Legion. If Gilgamesh's strategic intentions were realized, the army of Babylon would have nothing to worry about. The entire Saya Desert was under the control of the Kingdom of Babylon, and they could take advantage of the opportunity to cross the inland lake and occupy the entire plains of Duk. Hittite had just concluded a peace treaty with the Empire of Igut. Originally, they didn't wish to continue the war. However, with a powerful foe eyeing them covetously, they had no choice but to regroup their troops, advancing to the southwest corner of the inland lake in preparation. The Hittite army had not completely retreated, so it was convenient for them to regroup. King Lusir did not return to the front lines and went straight back to the capital. Before he left, he wanted to reappoint Goliath as the commander-in-chief of the battlefield. Indeed, there was no one more suitable than him. But Goliath rejected the appointment and recommended Prince Ashur to the king. Prince Ashur was Lusir's favorite youngest son, and he had accompanied the king on this expedition. When Lusir was kidnapped by Goliath was not at the frontline camp, and he had acted as the commander-in-chief of the battlefield. The prince had experienced the previous war and humbly sought guidance from Goliath, and he got along very well with the generals at the front lines. Ashur was suitable in terms of status, experience, and connections, and it was a rare opportunity for him to be the commander-in-chief of the battlefield. Lusir was already somewhat wary of Goliath's influence in the kingdom, and this suggestion was exactly what he wanted. So he went with the flow and appointed Ashur as the commander-in-chief of the battlefield. Prince Ashur himself was a little uncertain, so he begged Goliath to be the chief priest of the army. This was a new position that did not exist before, and in fact, it was to assist the prince in commanding the battle at the front lines. Goliath nodded and agreed. Prince Ashur was the commander-in-chief, but he obeyed Goliath's every word. When Goliath suggested that he stay put, Prince Ashur remained on the sidelines and was not in a hurry to fight. The armies of the two countries faced each other in a strange state of silence. Igut and Hittite were allies, and Goliath would send people to the Cape States every day to obtain the latest battle reports. The soldiers did not need to fight, but a group of mages in the army were exhausted, flying shuttles back and forth every day without rest. Meanwhile, the Babylon army was also waiting for news from the Uruk Corps. Once the southern front lines were stabilized, they could take advantage of the situation to advance. Even a supreme mage would normally take more than 2 days to drive a shuttle from the Hittite camp to the Cape States if they did not overexert themselves. At the same speed, it would take more than 3 days to cross the desert from the Babylon camp to the rear of the Uruk Corps. In other words, a round trip would take the Babylon army 7 days, while the Hittite army would need 5 days. In fact, Babylon's army did not use shuttles to send messages as frequently as Gallier did. Only a mage who had mastered advanced spatial magic and air magic could operate the shuttles, and that mage had to be at least a 6th level mage. How many mages did Babylon's army have to send to and fro every day? No one knew how long the current stalemate would last, and it was also a huge manpower drain. The fall of Enkidu, the #1 warrior of the continent, and Gilgamesh's retreat, Goliath was the first to receive the news, a full 4 days ahead of the Babylon army. When he received the news, Goliath advised the Assyrian prince to march immediately and launch a surprise attack before Babylon's army could react. The battle plan was also formulated by Goliath. Prince Ashur commanded the 3 legions of Enlil, Anu, and Nannar. Goliath's route of advance was not to go straight to the Babylon camp, but to go straight through the Sayed Desert in the south, while the army of Nannar launched an attack northwards. Of course, this single legion could not defeat the Babylon army. On the way, the Enlil legion would turn around and outflank the retreating army of Nannar to stop the Babylon army's counterattack. As for the Anu legion, the most elite legion formed by Goliath, they did not care about the unfavorable situation in the rear. They broke through all the defensive lines and entered Babylon territory, occupying the crossing on the west bank of the Euphrates River. This tactic of splitting the army to block the enemy and sneak attacking the enemy's rear caused the 2 legions of the Babylon kingdom to lose the crossing, cutting off their retreat. The Babylon army won several victories at the beginning and was about to push the army of Nannar and the Enlil legion back into the desert. At this time, the legion of Anu occupied the crossing and seized the enemy's logistical supplies on the bank of the Euphrates River. At Gallier's suggestion, Prince Ashur divided the Anu legion into 2 parts, with a small part guarding the west bank of the Euphrates River to block the reinforcements from Babylon, and a large part returning to flank the Babylon army, whose retreat route had been cut off. The Babylon army was immediately routed and was almost pushed into the inland lake. After a series of bitter battles, they barely managed to gain a foothold by the lake. They were already fighting with their backs against the river, and there was no way out. The sudden change in the situation at the front lines shocked the kingdom of Babylon, and they urgently mobilized the Ea legion to reinforce them. In terms of national strength, Babylon was stronger than Hittite. It had a larger territory, a larger population, fertile land, abundant resources, and a better standard of living. However, national strength did not necessarily equate to military strength. Under the command of Prince Ashur and Goliath, Hittite had an absolute advantage in the battle around the inland lake. There were 2 major problems for Babylon to reinforce the front lines. Firstly, the Ea legion might not be able to reach the front lines in time. Even if they could, they would have to cross the river and take over the position on the west bank. The crossing on the other side of the river had already been lost, and the cost of crossing the river was huge. It would take a long time for the reinforcements to cross the river. Under these circumstances, Babylon ordered the reinforcements to speed up their march while sending messengers to the Hittite camp by shuttle to negotiate for peace. To negotiate for peace was to admit defeat. They were willing to pay a ransom and ask the Hittite army to rescue them, then retreat the 2 legions to the east bank of the Euphrates River. This way, both sides could minimize their losses. This was a humiliating task, but the messengers had to be of high enough status. Ordinary ministers were not qualified to negotiate. The nobles pushed, and finally, the task fell to Prince Binut, who had always kept a low profile. On the surface, Prince Binut had no interest in the fight for the throne, but he liked to travel among the people and gather all kinds of talents, which made the other nephews of King Hammurabi wary. This time, they made a collective recommendation to make Binut the scapegoat. Originally, The king wanted to send Princess Sisela as the messenger, but the princess played a trick and pretended to be sick. The king's nephews then jointly recommended Binut. The affairs of the state were of utmost importance. Although he knew it was not a good thing, Prince Binut accepted the order and left. Binut brought only 2 attendants with him to the Hittite camp in a shuttle controlled by the supreme mage Jakai. Prince Ashur asked Goliath how to negotiate. Goliath suggested that the way to deal with Prince Binut was to stall, neither rush to the conclusion of the negotiations nor refuse the request. The way to deal with Babylon's army was to trap, neither besiege nor annihilate them, nor give them the slightest chance to breathe. At the same time, mobilize a large number of troops to strengthen the defenses on the west bank of the Euphrates River. The longer the battle dragged on, the more trapped they were, and the stronger the defenses of the Euphrates River were, the more advantageous it would be for Hittite, and the higher the price they could ask for in the negotiations. That was what Prince Ashur did, negotiating unhurriedly. As the price he asked for grew higher and higher, Prince Binut had no choice but to swallow the humiliation and agree. The young Prince Ashur had achieved such a brilliant victory in his first official command of an army, and he could not help but feel a little inflated. In the end, he even made a request. He asked the kingdom of Babylon to officially cede a large area of land on the west bank of the Euphrates River, which had been conquered by the Hittite army, to Hittite. This was the same request that Gilgamesh had made to the empire of Igut. Prince Binut did not dare to agree. He could tolerate any amount of money and supplies that the Hittite kingdom demanded, but this request was beyond the pale. Even if the kingdom of Babylon agreed, Prince Binut himself would be cursed by history. Prince Binut, who had always been modest, finally lost his temper and decided not to negotiate anymore. He said to Prince Ashur, "If your highness is stubborn, then let's start a decisive battle. Even if you can wipe out the 2 legions of Babylon and occupy the land on the west bank of the Euphrates River, your losses will not be small. The kingdom of Babylon will launch a counterattack with all its might, and no one will gain more than they lose." After saying this, Prince Binut prepared to leave. Even the various conditions that he had previously agreed to were nullified, and the negotiations officially broke down. Goliath was commanding the army at the front line, leaving Prince Ashur in the main camp to negotiate. When he heard the news, he immediately rushed back to remind His Highness that his request was indeed too much. If Prince Ashur did not want to fall out with Prince Ashur, he should not negotiate like this. After all, a victory should not be turned into a long-term war of attrition. Prince Ashur also regretted his decision. He quickly persuaded Prince Binut to withdraw his previous excessive demands and renegotiate. At this time, the reinforcements from Babylon had arrived at the east bank of the Euphrates River, but they did not cross the river by force. Instead, they were waiting for the outcome of the negotiations with the prince. Just then, a shocking piece of news came from the capital of Hittite. Prince Ashur had no choice but to end the negotiations and withdraw his troops. King Lucier had died of a sudden illness. According to the official statement, Lucier had been frightened when he was kidnapped by King Ahmet, and his mental state had not been very good. On the way back to the capital, he had caught a cold, and although the priests had carefully treated him, he still did not get up. After returning to the capital, the king's mood improved a little, and he relaxed. He held a banquet in the palace, but due to excessive drinking, he fell ill and died in the middle of the night. The cause of the king's death was suspicious, but all the court records were flawless, so no one dared to say anything. A country could not be without a ruler for a single day. Before the king died, he passed the throne to his eldest son, Anes. While Prince Ashur was leading the army into battle, his eldest brother had succeeded to the throne with the support of the court. After King Anes succeeded to the throne, he wanted to hold a funeral for his father, so he sent an urgent report to the front lines. On one hand, he informed the king of his death and the succession of a new ruler. At the same time, he urgently summoned Prince Ashur back to the capital to attend Lucier's funeral, and ordered Goliath to succeed him as the commander-in-chief of the battlefield. Ashur and Anes were contenders for the king's throne, and they each had their own influence in the kingdom. People had long understood that the new king after Lucier must be one of them. This time, by letting Ashur lead the army and be assisted by Goliath, Lucier's intention was clear. He wanted to pass his position to Ashur, and making contributions was just a stepping stone. At the same time, it could also establish Ashur's prestige in the army. But no one expected Lucier's death to be so sudden, and his eldest son, Aeneas, took advantage of the situation to ascend the throne, and on the surface, it was a matter of course. As the king, he ordered Prince Ashur to step down from his position as commander-in-chief of the battlefield and immediately return to the capital to attend Lucier's funeral. If Ashur really sent out his troops and returned just like that, wouldn't it be the same as throwing his life away? Ashur, who received the news, was shocked. He found Goliath and had a long talk with him throughout the night. Outsiders did not know the content of the conversation, but when Prince Ashur came out of Goliath's tent, he immediately ordered the messenger from the capital to be detained and placed under house arrest. He also strictly ordered that the news should not be leaked, so as not to shake the morale of the army during the war. Prince Ashur claimed that he could not believe that his father was dead, and sent a messenger back to the capital to verify it. He suspected that the messenger this time was a spy from the kingdom of Babylon, deliberately pretending to be a messenger from the capital to disrupt the morale of the Hittite army. This excuse was very forced. The news of Lucier's death was absolutely true, and Ashur was just stalling for time. He wanted to end the war with the kingdom of Babylon before the messenger he sent returned from the capital, and he was eager to complete the negotiations. Prince Banut seemed to have heard some news, and the situation at the negotiation table was reversed. On the contrary, Prince Ashur was extremely anxious, wishing that he could give Babylon a sum of money and quickly send the Babylon army away. Prince Banut had originally accepted this difficult task under the infamy of losing his country's sovereignty, but he did not expect to get such a great bargain. He also knew when to stop, and did not make any excessive demands. He still paid a symbolic ransom, and the two countries reached an agreement to withdraw their troops from each other. Prince Ashur, of course, hoped that the sooner the better, so Prince Banut did something glorious. With only 2 followers, he passed through the heavy encirclement of the Hittite army, entered the camp of the Babylon army, and brought out the 2 exhausted and heavily wounded legions, all the way to the safety of the eastern bank of the Euphrates River. Then the Hittite army retreated, and Prince Banut led the reinforced Egyptian army to cross the Euphrates River again, recovering the lost land on the western bank without a drop of blood. This caused a great sensation in the kingdom of Babylon, and from word of mouth, Prince Banut became a legendary hero. He entered the enemy's camp alone, and did not fail to fulfill his mission. After the fall of Enkidu and the retirement of Gilgamesh, the people of the kingdom of Babylon needed a new hero to restore the deep sense of loss. Prince Banut's appearance came at the right time, and his reputation in the kingdom was unparalleled. He was a prince, one of the legitimate heirs to the throne, which was something that Hittites Goliath or Igots could not compare to. Not to mention how Prince Banut became the hero of the kingdom of Babylon, Prince Ashur of the Hittite kingdom did not have the authority to dispatch troops. He did return to the king's capital to attend the funeral, but he did not return by himself. Instead, he returned with the elite chariots and cavalry of the Hittite army. The Enlil legion was originally stationed in the capital, so it was only right for them to follow the prince back to the capital. The generals under Prince Banut also brought all the elites with them in the name of attending the king's funeral, and they galloped all the way to the capital, Hattusha. When George received the news in Montefiore, Prince Ashur had just set off. It seemed that the civil war in the Hittite kingdom was inevitable. It was also said that Goliath had also returned to the capital with the prince, and it was unknown what role he would play. When Ashur heard the news, his heart was filled with emotion. He had once captured the former king of the Hittite kingdom, Lucier, and kept him by his side for more than half a month. Although the king was not very strong, his body was not that weak. He also had a supreme mage to treat him at any time, so he should not have died so quickly. It seemed that there was more to it than meets the eye. He was also feeling sorry for Goliath. Goliath led the main force of the Hittite army, and the 2 wars he commanded were extremely successful. He should have won both wars, but both ended in a draw, and it was King Lucier who lagged behind. The king was dead, and his death was the last and most serious disaster to befall the country. It was truly not a good thing from birth to death. Amidst his emotions, he smiled bitterly and asked the man beside George, "General John, since you have recovered from your injuries, why didn't you go to the NRA Legion and instead followed the high priest to my territory?" The guest that George brought was John, the frontline commander of the NRA Legion. Not long ago, Asher recommended him to be the next head of the Legion, and the Pharaoh did not reject it, only saying that he would appoint John after he recovered from his injuries. Counting the days, John should have already taken up his post, so why would he have the time to visit Asher's territory? When John heard the question, he slammed the table heavily and said, "Supreme General, don't mention it. I was dismissed as soon as I took up my post, and even demoted by one rank." Asher was surprised. "What happened? Did your bad temper flare up again? What trouble did you cause this time?" At the side, George shook his head and said, "The cause and effect of this matter are very complicated. You can't blame General John for his bad temper. Let me explain slowly." Pharaoh did not refute Asher and the military. When John recovered from his injuries and returned to the Montefiore military office to report, Pharaoh ordered him to be appointed as the head of the NRA Legion, and he was to rush to the Cape States to take up his post on the same day. John was a straightforward person, so he immediately went. While John was on his way to the Cape States, Pharaoh and Igut's military headquarters in the distant capital received several reports of impeachment against John. It was a long story. As early as when I was training his troops on the march, he had dealt with a few priests who didn't work hard. At that time, it was Hardadef who dragged them out of the army formation and personally beat them half to death. One of the priests was severely injured. It was unknown if he was faking it or if Hardadef was too heavy-handed in his rage. In any case, this person took the opportunity to be transferred out of the army and returned to the rear to recuperate before going into battle. At that time, Asher did not have absolute authority. The priests were all under the jurisdiction of George. George had to agree because the priest was the distant nephew of Joseph, the prime minister of Igut. The priest may have been afraid of death and did not want to go to the front line, or he may have been unwilling to be humiliated. But later on, Asher made great achievements on the battlefield, and the accompanying priests of the NRA Legion were rewarded with high honors. Of course, all the credit did not go to the priest. He was always ridiculed by people, so he especially hated Asher and John. With Asher's outstanding achievements, it was not wise to find fault with him. So he targeted John. There were many people who wanted to find fault with John. Some small things could not touch him, but one accusation was very serious. John once publicly reprimanded Pharaoh's orders as bullshit. That was after the battle with the Hittite army and just returned to Igut. Before the news of the Uruk Legion's raid arrived, Pharaoh had already ordered Asher to be dismissed from his post. John happened to meet the messenger on his way back. When he heard the news, he was furious and shouted, "Bullshit! Asher is a warrior. Is there any position more suitable than being the head of an imperial legion? Even if you want to appoint him to another position, he can still be the head of an imperial legion." At that time, John's hand was on the hilt of his sword and he was surrounded by soldiers. The messenger was so scared that his face turned pale. Coincidentally, the Supreme Mage Julian arrived with Pharaoh's second order, appointing Asher as the commander-in-chief of the battlefield. Only then did John stop losing his temper. This matter could be big or small. If no one pursued it, it would just be a general cursing. But if they really wanted to collect evidence and make a big fuss about it, and then write a written impeachment report in hieroglyphs and send it to the Egyptian military and the pharaoh, the quality of the problem would be serious. Pharaoh claimed to be the representative of Horus on earth, symbolizing the will of the gods, protecting and ruling over Igut. To protect and rule Egypt, his official orders were equivalent to the effects of an oracle. Who dared to say that an oracle was bullshit? This was a great disrespect, a blasphemy against the gods, a disgrace to the dignity of the empire, and must be severely punished. A priest might not be able to stir up such a storm, but he went to the prime minister of the empire to complain. The prime minister secretly intervened, so he obtained the signed testimony of the messenger, as well as the testimonies of the other people present, and then submitted an impeachment report. The prime minister of the empire had other considerations in this matter. He also wanted to use this matter to attack the military forces that had risen after the war, especially to weaken the influence of the newly rising Ashur. Although Ashur had lost his military power, his influence in the military still remained. John was his most important subordinate, and this was more or less in accordance with Pharaoh's hints. Chapter 156. The concealment of the gods. The murder took place in Thebes, the capital of Igut. The victim was a mage, and it happened at such a sensitive time. Although no clues were found about the murderer, the most direct suspect and mastermind was John. People couldn't help but suspect him. Pharaoh was furious. If John dared to do this, he would be out of control. After investigating John's background, it turned out that he was a guy who dared to do anything. Pharaoh sent messengers to the Cape States for questioning, mainly investigating two things. One was whether John said that Pharaoh's order was bullshit, and the other was whether he sent someone to kill the priest. John received Pharaoh's messenger in the barracks. After hearing the purpose of the messenger's visit, he pulled out his sword and cut the table in front of him, scaring the messenger to death. Rod Dick was also at the side, worried that John would hurt Pharaoh's messenger in a moment of impulse, so he quickly stepped forward to dissuade him. John pushed Rod Dick away and said, "Don't worry, I just want to clarify things." Originally, it should have been the emissary interrogating Hardadef, but in the end, it became Hardadef interrogating the emissary. He asked a question, and the emissary answered honestly, clearly explaining the cause and effect of this matter. John replied with a sneer, "I did say bullshit," in front of Pharaoh's messenger. "I am a soldier. Even if I don't agree with the order, I will carry it out at the time. You can reply to Igut's military like this. As for the priest's death, it has nothing to do with me. I won't use this method to take his life, I will only fight him directly. If he is still alive, I will kill him. You can reply to Pharaoh like this." Just like that, Pharaoh's messenger left the Cape States. But before he left, he accepted a large sum of money from Rod Dick. Lord Dick asked the messenger to mediate between them and make some minor changes to John's answer. John did say that it was bullshit, but that was to scold the messenger for speculating on Pharaoh's intentions without permission, and not to directly target Pharaoh's orders. As for the murder case in the royal capital, no one could say anything about it since there was no solid evidence. Several important members of Igut's military, such as Vladimir and Enk, were also very dissatisfied with Pharaoh's investigation of John. John's family was also involved, but in the end, the punishment was not severe. The priest's death was not necessarily related to the impeachment of John. He owed a lot of gambling debts when he was alive, so it was hard to say what the murderer's motive was. It was hard to investigate without any concrete evidence. John was indeed rude to Pharaoh's messenger, and his words were inappropriate. He was demoted to reflect on his mistakes, and the NRA Legion's commander was temporarily held by Rod Dick. John was promoted 3 times because of his military merits after the war. Now that he was demoted, it was equivalent to a promotion of 2 ranks. However, he did not become the commander of the Legion. Rod Dick had it hard. After Julian's death, the Lord of Igut became the chief priest of the Cape States. He had just stepped down as the commander of the Legion of Seat, but now he had to take on the responsibility of the NRA Legion's commander. It seemed that he had great power in the Cape States, but if anything went wrong, he would have to bear the consequences himself. The Empire's official decision to punish John was to demote him to reflect on his mistakes, and wait for conscription. At the same time, it was emphasized that the decision was made because of his meritorious service to the country, so he should be given a light sentence. The official document also added a sentence: "He has failed to live up to the expectations of the Supreme General and should apologize to the Supreme General." The hidden meaning of the document was obvious: for the sake of the face of the Supreme General, John should be given a light sentence. John had made a meritorious service, so it was not appropriate to punish him heavily. However, he could not be arrogant because of his military merits. Since John was asked to apologize to the Supreme General, John did not bother to report to the military office after returning to Montefiore. He directly followed George to the Supreme General's place. After listening to the whole story, the Supreme General shook his head and sighed. He asked John, "Why did you answer the messenger of the Pharaoh in that way?" Anyway, there was no record of magic at that time, so there was no proof. If you stubbornly refused to admit it, no one would be able to catch you. Moreover, the impeacher is dead, so it is not convenient for others to stand out in public and continue to pester you. John said flatly, "What I said is what I said. Even if the Pharaoh asked me personally, I would still answer the same way. If it was not bullshit, why did he retract the order and appoint you as the commander-in-chief of the battlefield?" As soon as the war was over, he wanted to punish people, and when he was looking for people to die, he thought of you. The Supreme General frowned, "But why did you swing your sword in front of the messenger of the Pharaoh, and even cut the table in half?" If it were not for Rod Dick's mediation, the frightened messenger would have gone back to add some crimes, and you would not have been able to bear it. Was the irritation and impulsiveness in your heart unable to be suppressed, so that you lost your calm? John replied seriously, "I was indeed angry at that time, and I could feel the restless power, but it was no longer out of control. It was like the potential that existed at any time, and I could use it freely. That sword was just to show my attitude." Although I was angry, my heart was very clear, very calm, and I knew what I should do and how to answer. The Supreme General stared at John for a long time, and suddenly laughed. "After you recovered from your serious injury, you have changed a lot. It is a great achievement to keep your mind calm in the midst of the restless power. It seems that you don't want to be the head of the Legion, so you took the opportunity to escape. It doesn't matter even if you are demoted by one rank." John laughed and said, "Yes, it's all thanks to your guidance all this time. I've finally broken free from the double shackles of my body and mind. I've never felt so relaxed before. That restless power can no longer drive me. Instead, it has integrated into my body and mind." The Supreme General stood up and said to George, "The three of us used to be the three chief officers of the NRA Legion, and today we get together here. Let's have a good drink tonight, and also celebrate John becoming a supreme warrior." George also laughed. "It turns out that the Supreme General also saw that John has advanced to a supreme warrior. I deliberately didn't mention it just now." John, on the other hand, was a little shy. This achievement cannot be compared with the Supreme General and the High Priest. "What about Madanzo? He is also a supreme warrior. He should be here. I really want to drink with him. Unfortunately, I sent him out on an errand a few days ago. If General John is willing to stay here for a while, he will naturally be able to wait for his return." That night, the three drank and chatted merrily together. John felt that sitting in the small hall was not lively enough, so he simply ordered the servants to set up a large tent in the open space, set up the banquet there, and called the guards to eat and drink together. The scene was very lively, as if they had returned to the time when the army was on the march. John was drunk and was helped back to rest. After the banquet, George called the Supreme General to the small hall alone, handed him a beautiful copper box, and said, "Supreme General, this is the ancient book you wanted to see. Only a supreme mage can open this box intact without destroying the contents inside, so I personally brought it here and took it out in front of you." The Supreme General said with some embarrassment, "It's hard for the High Priest to come in person. I didn't expect this ancient book to be so particular. When I was in the archives, I only knew that it was locked in a cabinet, but it turned out that there was a mechanism in the cabinet." George smiled bitterly. "It's because of Supreme General's face, otherwise it would be impossible for this kind of ancient book to leave the Temple of Isis. If you want to see it, it's not impossible, but you have to go to the scene yourself and you can't take it away. I told Lady Holy NV, and she asked me if I wanted to come here to relax. I said yes, and she sent me here with the ancient book, and then I have to be responsible for taking it back myself." Ah was slightly surprised. "What ancient book is this?" George was stunned. You gave the file number, don't you know it yourself? Ah smiled awkwardly. I have been to many places and heard a lot of rumors, but I only know that there is such a file number, but I don't know the content. George glanced at him. Where do you know so many strange rumors? Forget it, I don't want to ask, you can read it if you want. To be honest, even I have not seen this ancient book. According to the Archives Index, it is an ancient myth and legend, and may involve the hidden past of the gods, so it is difficult to distinguish the truth from the lies. A myth like this that may be disrespectful to the gods should be destroyed, but this book is a collection passed down since ancient times, so it was sealed. I checked the records, and the last time someone borrowed it was more than 200 years ago. Ah asked curiously, so, this box has not been opened for at least 200 years? George looked at the box with a strange expression. According to the records of the archives, it should be so. As for whether anyone has opened it during this period of time, I don't know, it is not in my hands all the time. Now that you mention it, even I am curious. After you finish reading it, I will also take a good look. Both of them were proficient in advanced message magic, so of course the box was sealed by magic, but the traces of the seal were obviously from recent decades, indicating that someone had opened it without registration. As for who did it, it was most likely Bear, but they tacitly did not mention it. George opened the copper box in front of Ah, took out a roll of pale yellow documents, and then went back to rest. Ah took the scroll back to his bedroom, did not light the lamp, and opened the window to read it in the moonlight. With his eyesight now, he could read it clearly. The scroll was written on papyrus paper hundreds of years ago, slightly incomplete, but still very well preserved. Surprisingly, it turned out to be written in a secular language rather than a divine text. The notes were slightly messy but neat, in the format of a poem, and the content seemed to be an ancient myth and legend recorded by a folk poet. The first long poem told the story of the goddess Isis and the god Ra. In this long poem, it claimed that Isis was the first human to master language, and that Ra was the ancient god who ruled the world and was also the first sun god of Igut, who symbolized the rise of life and hope. Isis made a snake out of sand, placed it in the place where Ra patrolled every day, and bit the god. Ra was poisoned and felt great pain. Isis came to him and sang, "O God, have you been bitten by a poisonous snake? Language has the power of wisdom, it can overcome pain, please tell me your original name and the hidden language, so that you may be healed." Ra replied, "I am the ruler of heaven and earth, the creator of the gods, and as far as the horizon you can see is my realm. I am Caldan at night, Ra by day, Hepri in the morning, and Adam at dusk." Isis added, "This is not your original name, please tell me the real secret, and all this pain will disappear." So Ra spoke his original name and the hidden language, and Isis gained his magical power, became more powerful than Ra, and became the patron goddess of Montefiore and all of Lower Igut, while the ancient Ra retreated to the clouds at the source of the Nile River. This long poem made Ra blink. Many parts of the story told by the wandering poets hundreds of years ago were specious and difficult to understand, such as language, original name, hidden language, which may have other meanings, or were just the poet's imagination of something he did not understand. Some were absurd, but there were also some symbolic shadows. In this poem, it was clearly mentioned that Isis was once a human being, not a god. According to Ra's understanding, it should be that Isis had mastered some kind of cultivation secret, which was the language, and obtained the secret of becoming a god from Ra, which was the hidden language. As for the original name, it may refer to something else. How did Isis gain the power of Ra? Was it just the imagination of the wandering poets, or was it an exaggeration of folklore? But Ra clearly remembered that Schrödinger once said that she wanted to find a person who could both save her from trouble and not seek divine power to restrain her. It seemed that there was really such a thing, but she did not know the mystery behind it. Ra shook her head, temporarily put aside the doubts in her mind, and went on to read the next long poem. The content of this poem was somewhat contradictory to the previous one, and it may be a different version of the legend among the people. It was about the family of the Ennead. Ra was the oldest god of creation among the Ennead, born in the lotus of the first at the source of the Nile River. Ra spat out the god of wind, Shu, and the god of water, Fu, from his mouth. Shu and Fu gave birth to the god of earth, Geb, and the god of the sky, Nut. Geb and Nut gave birth to 4 gods, namely, Osiris, Isis, Nephthys, and Seth. The name of Horus, the god of Igut, was not mentioned in this poem. It was already clear to Ra that the relationship between the gods was not the same as that of the human world, it was just that people understood it that way. In this poem, Isis and Ra were separated by several generations, and her divine power did not come directly from Ra. If these 2 poems were read in conjunction, one could make a conjecture that Isis gained power from Shut and Geb, and then used this power and other means to defeat an Ra, obtain an Ra's secrets and divine power, and become the supreme queen of queens. After Ra's retirement, Horus, the son of Isis, became the king of Igut, and occupied the position of the main god among the Ennead. Turned to the 3rd long poem, and the story turned out to be the Battle of the Ancient Gods. It turned out that this kind of conflict also broke out between the Ennead. Some of the plots in the poem were still inconsistent and contradictory with the first 2 poems. The characters in the story were not like gods, but more like a record of a human court struggle, just like what was happening on the continent today. It was said that Osiris became the most powerful god and was known as the king of the gods. He symbolized fertility, controlled the life and death of all things, established the empire of Igut, and was honored as the pharaoh. His younger brother, Seth, was the protector of the royal power, but murdered Osiris by trickery and became the king of Igut. Seth put Osiris in a coffin and threw him into the Nile River, and Osiris's wife, Isis, went through untold hardships to retrieve her husband's body. When Seth found out, he cut Osiris's body into many pieces and threw them in different parts of Igut. Isis recovered all the parts of the body piece by piece, except for a piece of blood, which was said to have been eaten by fish in the Nile River. Isis became pregnant next to Osiris's body and gave birth to Horus. Isis raised Horus and taught him power. With the help of the other gods, he defeated Seth, reclaimed the throne, and became the new king of the gods, the king of Igut forever. The poem did not end here, and there was a sequel. Isis found Osiris's broken body in the swamp and desert with the help of Nephthys, and Osiris was resurrected. The papyrus was a little damaged here, and it seemed to say that Osiris's soul reappeared, and seeing that Horus had become the king of the gods, he returned to the underworld and became the god of the underworld of the Ennead. After reading the 3rd long poem, Ash looked out of the window and fell into deep thought. The content of the poem was naturally processed by the poet's imagination, but a few things could still be confirmed, and the legend was not groundless. The people of Igut did not eat fish, nor did they fish in the Nile River. It was said that the fish in the Nile River had the blood of Osiris in their bodies. This river led to the underworld, and Osiris was the protector of the Nile River. The annual flooding of the Nile River, the withering of vegetation, symbolized the cycle of life and death, and also symbolized Osiris's resurrection. The poem mentioned that Osiris's body was divided into many parts by Seth, and some of his blood was eaten by the fish in the Nile River, which was the origin of the current custom of the people of Igut. Another unmistakable piece of evidence was one of Osiris's ribs, which was now in Ash's hands. It was a sacred object that Bear had stolen from the temple of Isis. It seemed that Osiris had given up his original body and did not return to the world, but became the god of the underworld. Did he have a new body, or was it an existence like a soul? Ash did not know. The pharaohs of Igut were known as the Horus of the world during their lifetime, and Osiris of the underworld after their death. They had to build magnificent mausoleums for themselves, and their bodies could be preserved for a long time after special treatment, hoping to be resurrected like Osiris, which also proved the existence of the myths and legends from long ago. Ash sighed and lowered his head to read the last chapter, which mentioned the story of the Igut cat goddess, Batet. Seeing this, Ash finally understood why Schrödinger wanted him to read this ancient book. The secret of her losing her divine power and being sealed may be hidden in this ancient legend. Chapter 157. Fish I Love You. The title of this story was The Book of the Dead, and the opening was no different from the current Igut myth. Man's life is like the flowing Nile River, the end of which is the underworld ruled by Osiris. The god of the underworld would send a crescent-shaped ship to receive the soul, and when the god of the underworld's goddess Batet, who was in the form of a cat, appeared beside the corpse, the soul of the deceased would be resurrected in the underworld and come before Osiris to be judged for the good and evil of his life. But this story also specifically mentioned the origin of Batet. Batet was a goddess, but under the judgment of fate, she became a cat, and guarded the granary for the people of Igut to atone for her sins. When she gradually regained her power as a god, Osiris sealed and controlled her divine power, making her the underworld's protector and receiving souls from the divine realm. Oh, I see. Aku had never heard of this story before. It seemed like something must have happened to that goddess and turned her into a cat. Had seen beings like the Scorpion King, and he would not be surprised if cats could also cultivate the power of the gods. However, this cat was under the control of Osiris, and its divine power was sealed, which was incomprehensible. The content of this ancient book was not too long, but Che spent the whole night reading it. When the sun rose outside the window, he closed the book and put it back into the copper box. Schrödinger wanted to tell him about Igut's past with the Ennead, and why she was trapped in the body of a cat. If they wanted to save her, he had to understand the cause and effect. This ancient book explained everything very well. Thinking of this, could not help but smile bitterly. He sympathized with Schrödinger and was willing to do everything in his power to help her. However, he could not even protect himself now, and the power that he had lost showed no signs of recovering. Did not even know what he should do, much less help Schrödinger break the seal. George stayed in Adi's manor for a few days. He also read the ancient book, but he was still confused. Of course, the great general had to build up his newly bestowed territory and act as if he wanted to stay here for a long time. There were many houses built in the manor, a camp for the guards, a stable, and a garden for the great general himself. The so-called garden was to expand the backyard of the manor, which was not just a normal size. It required planting trees, digging a pond, leveling a training field, and building a shrine, which was usually dedicated to Horus. But had his own requirements, just like his manor in Montefiore. His temple was dedicated to the cat goddess Batet, which was obviously to make Schrödinger happy. When gave this order, George smiled and said, "I heard that when you were holding the king hostage, you let a cat sit and eat first, Lucier waited, while you roasted it." King George. Cat king of king. You, king, the general cat king even shrine of the king temple is love to cat. Gut king is beast. God cat king Batet. King Adi smiled and asked, "Why can't I? What's wrong with that?" George replied, "Beast is also the god of Igut. Of course, the great general can worship it." Adi looked out of the window, wondering where Schrödinger had gone. He nodded and said, "Since the high priest has said so, I should worship this god even more." George suddenly thought of something and joked, "Everyone in the Legion knows that the great general loves that cat so much." The ancient book you borrowed also mentioned beast goddess Batet at the end. No wonder you're interested. Did your cat let you read it? Adi did not answer, but just laughed and changed the topic. He lowered his voice and said, "High priest, I have something to ask you." Seeing that Adi's expression suddenly became serious, George also lowered his voice and said, "If you have something to say, just say it. If you need my help, don't hesitate to ask." Adi thought seriously for a moment and said, "You also know my current situation. Although it's glorious, it's not convenient for me to do anything. If I leave my territory to do anything, I need to report to the nearest city and the officials of Igut. But if I want to find a place to go out for a walk, no one will object." George smiled again, "That's easy. In a few months, the annual blessing ceremony of Isis will be here. You were once an honorary warrior of the Temple of Isis, and you also made great contributions in the ceremony 2 years ago. It's natural for you to go to Montefiore to participate in the ceremony. You just need to say hello. The Holy Queen often mentions you, you should also go and pay her a visit. If you didn't mention it, I would have almost forgotten. Last year's blessing ceremony was during the war, when we were still at the front lines. The next ceremony should be in half a year's time. I'll just wait patiently. George asked again, is there anything else I can help you with? Dee hesitated and said, there's nothing else I can trouble you with. I wish you a safe journey. When you go back and see the Holy Queen, please convey my greetings and gratitude. Dee wanted to ask George if a 7th level mage would also lose his power when he advanced to the 8th level. If this was a test that he had to go through, how could he pass it? Even if he couldn't get an answer, he wanted to ask this 8th level mage for advice on how to get out of this predicament. He knew very well that George was different from other supreme mages. Like Crazy Ol, George was also a sorcerer. But he swallowed the words that were on the tip of his tongue. No matter how good his relationship with George was, he was still the high priest of the Temple of Isis. Some secrets were better left unsaid. Even the topic of Crazy Ol was deliberately avoided between the two. Dee's loss of power was an absolute secret. Even Madanzo and the others didn't know about it. When George left, of course, Dee could not let him go empty-handed. He gave him a number of extremely expensive gifts. Nowadays, the Supreme General was rich. George accepted his gift and gave him another gift in return. It was the crystal shuttle he used to fly with Dee to spy on the enemy camp. This magic tool was like a small translucent plate, with a ventusum in the middle and 3 aquaticores symmetrically on the outside. It didn't look like an inlay, but a refined whole. Its speed was not as fast as the most common wind shuttles, but it could turn the space it entered into a hazy translucent state, making it difficult to be seen in the background light and shadow of the sky. If one wanted to conserve magic power at high altitudes, it could also turn into a gray or white mist, like a drifting cloud. Riding this kind of shuttle could avoid detection magic. If one kept a safe distance, even supreme mages wouldn't be able to detect them. It was with this magic tool that George and discovered the camp of King Lucier. This magic tool could only be used by supreme mages, but George gave it to Dee and said meaningfully, with my current position, I have enough wealth and power to get what I want, but things like the crystal shuttle are hard to come by. I made it myself, and it symbolizes the suffering we have gone through. You must accept it. This is a souvenir of us going through fire and water together. It may be more useful in your hands than in mine. This was really a good thing. If Dee regained his power and wanted to quietly escape from the Igut, this would be an excellent weapon. Even if Dee didn't use it himself, it would be great to give it to his disciples. Dee didn't hesitate and accepted it after thanking him. George left, but John remained in Dee's manor. He didn't have the slightest intention of returning to Montefiore. All day long, he led Dee's guards on horseback, hunting, and even went to the Nile River to catch crocodiles. He had a lot of fun. When the shrine was being built, John even took the initiative to help supervise the work, allocating supplies, mining stones, and assigning workers. Everything was like commanding an army to carry out a mission. The miners of Duk were the best craftsmen. Of course, Dee's manor couldn't do without these slaves, so he simply put John in charge of this matter. John asked Moses to transfer a third of his men to the manor to help the Supreme General build the shrine. After the general advanced to a supreme warrior and integrated the restless power into his body and mind, his temper was much better than before. He no longer beat and scolded people. But just by standing there, he emitted an invisible murderous aura. Dee asked when John would return. John shook his head and said, I don't want to go back to Montefiore. I'm more comfortable here. Just let me stay here. There are many things to do in your territory. I'll help you train your guards, and I want to wait for Madanzo to come back to exchange pointers. Dee had no choice but to let John stay in his territory. Not long after, Madanzo returned with the wind shuttle and link. Before Madanzo left, he told him that if Link was able to come out, it would be best for him to see him. He had something to do for Link, and at the same time, he wanted to see how his disciples' training in the power of two sides was progressing. The news brought by Link was very good. In a short period of time, not only did he lead the savages to establish a firm foothold, but he also gathered thousands of people to build a stronghold. The embryonic form of a city had already appeared. It was impossible for so many people to come from Link's tribe. Many of them were savages from other tribes who had come out of the mountains, and many of them turned out to be highlanders. When the flood gradually receded, the area of the isolated island where Link was located grew larger and larger. It was the largest piece of fertile land in the center of the swamp, and several paths leading to the east and north also appeared. Elmar and the other ironbacks no longer needed to carry them out. As the climate and landscape changed in this area, many beasts appeared on the plains of Duk, and some tribes also came out of the mountains to hunt on the plains. Knowing that there was a large village here, many people took the initiative to come to Link for shelter. Coincidentally, the Saya Plateau had suffered a flood not long ago. After the climate changed, there was more rain. The rainstorm had nothing to do with the gods, and it rained on the plateau for a long time, causing flash floods. It was originally only a small disaster, but for the Highlanders who had lived there for generations, it was a great disaster. Their villages were destroyed, and many of their prey disappeared, so they were forced to come out of the mountains to the plains. The simple-minded Highlanders had several conflicts with the savages at first, but they were all cleaned up by Link. Later, Link took in many wandering Highlanders, gave them work, and gave them a place to live and food to eat, which could be considered as saving these people. All this was thanks to Ian Sua, who came to Link's side and was of great help. He assigned everyone to different tasks, made plans, reclaimed the wilderness with the highest efficiency under the existing conditions, built houses and walls, sent people to guard and survey the surrounding environment, organized the warriors to hunt collectively, and managed thousands of people in an orderly manner. Link, on the other hand, had nothing to do, and before Madanzo could say anything, he urged Madanzo to bring him to see him, and Madanzo brought him back. Although Link was the chief of the tribe and the most capable leader in the tribe, he was still the same as when he was a teenager. He had never been to any other place except the wastelands around Duk and the mountains of the valley. Along the way, everything he saw was strange, and he could not help but beg Madanzo to take him to the towns to see the world. Madanzo laughed at him several times, but he still took Link to several cities along the way to broaden his horizons. The dazzling things in the shops made Link drool. He bought a bunch of things and stored them in the spatial artifact carried by Madanzo, as well as a lot of grain seeds and various new farming tools. After several days of delay on the road, the two of them finally returned to Duke's territory. There was another thing that made Madanzo a little depressed. He had become a supreme warrior and a supreme sorcerer, and he thought to himself that he would be able to show off in front of Link this time. As a result, Link also broke through to the 7th level and became a supreme warrior and a supreme sorcerer, advancing side by side with Madanzo. The two of them went to the swamp to learn from each other. In terms of fighting strength, they were evenly matched. Neither of them was weak. But when it came to fighting, Madanzo still had the upper hand. After all, he was a general who had fought on the battlefield. He had even fought head-on with the continent's #1 warrior, Enkidu. In terms of actual combat skills and experience, Link was no match for him. Link could not beat Madanzo. Just as he was about to admit defeat, he suddenly whistled and Elmar jumped out of nowhere. Link and Elmar, the king of the Ironbacks, beat Metatro up and down, and finally won. Madanzo shouted that Link was shameless, but Link just laughed. Looking back and seeing Link's starry eyes, Madanzo laughed at him many times. Finally, he got back at him. Seeing that Link had also achieved the 7th level, Duk was very happy. He nodded with a smile and said, "You said that when we build a new home on fertile land, every day will be fruitful, and every day we can witness new creations. As long as there is such a heart, life is full of positive meaning. It seems that this state of mind has been confirmed." Duke was not in a hurry to send Link back. Instead, he kept him in his territory as a temporary housekeeper, mainly responsible for managing the daily lives of Moses and the other slaves and assigning them daily tasks. Duke's arrangement was well-intentioned. Even if Moses and the others returned to Duke, they had to integrate into the new city-state. They had to live in harmony with Link's people and other residents. Duke himself did not deliberately get close to the people of Duke. He was still a high and mighty general. Usually, they did not even have the opportunity to meet him. He left all the good deeds to Link. Whatever materials Moses and the others needed, tools and food, were all handled by Link. Link's attitude towards these people was very good, and he did them many favors. Moses and the others were also very grateful. Link also had another task, which was to secretly supervise the training of Moses and the others. Although no one would poke their noses into other people's business in Duke's territory, he still had to pay attention to confidentiality, in case the information was accidentally leaked. Now that Link had achieved the 7th level, Moses and the others would not be aware of his secret surveillance and protection. Although Duke's considerations were thorough enough, one day, when Moses and 12 of his clansmen were practicing magic in the valley, they were still discovered. This matter had to be related to John. John was overjoyed to see Madanzo return. He had just advanced to a supreme warrior, but there was no opponent by his side to spar with. It was not good to find General Duke to spar with. As soon as Madanzo arrived, he was dragged out by John for a drink, and then they had to compete in martial arts on the hunting ground. As a result, for 3 days in a row, Madanzo won 3 out of 3 fights, beating John to the point that he did not have the slightest temper. Hardadef was very puzzled. They were both supreme warriors of the 7th rank, and Hardadef could use his restless explosive power. In this state, he was much stronger than the average supreme warrior, but he still couldn't deal with Metatro. Madanzo could use all kinds of magic to assist in battle, and he used it very covertly, almost without a trace. He had 100 moves and endless moves. John had a spirit that refused to admit defeat. Although he was defeated, he continued to fight. While training hard, he continued to ask Madanzo for advice. Madanzo secretly told John that Link was also a supreme warrior, and like him, he was taught and guided by Duke, so he could find Link to spar. If Madanzo did not say it, John would not have been able to see it. Because Link was now a butler, and he was always smiling, he had never seen him touch a weapon. As a result, John brought a weapon to Link. At that time, Link was supervising the work on the construction site. He fought with John in front of Moses and the others, and John was defeated by Link again. This time, John was obedient. He knew that there was always someone stronger than him. There were really hidden dragons and crouching tigers around Duke. When he saw that Madanzo did not continue to serve as Duke's guard captain, he went to beg Duke to stay with the Supreme General no matter what, and simply let him be the guard captain. Duke had the right to appoint a nobleman as his guard captain. His status was quite high. Although the guard captain did not manage many people and did not have much power, his status was not low. Appointing John as the guard captain was tantamount to giving John a rank of nobility. Since John was willing, Duke agreed. John became the guard captain of the Supreme General. In addition to protecting Duke, he also managed the security of the territory. This captain was very conscientious. When he had nothing to do, he would patrol around with the guards to see if there was any trouble that needed to be taken care of. And there was really no security incident to deal with in the territory of the Supreme General. Including Duke himself, there were a total of 4 supreme warriors living here, and there were 36 guards who were like wolves and tigers. Who would cause trouble? Even the roaming thieves would hide far away from them. Leaving so many masters by his side, of course, Duke had his considerations. He had been unable to recover his strength for a long time, and there was naturally a deep anxiety in his subconscious. If he did not even have the power to protect himself, how could he fulfill those difficult wishes? Even his own situation seemed very dangerous, so naturally, the more masters he could trust, the better. Duk could have already sent Moses and the others to the plains of Duk and let Link escort them, but he had delayed moving this group of clansmen. In addition to wanting to continue to train them, there was also this reason. This was his wish and a promise to Yun Nam Na. It was best to wait until he recovered his strength, so that in case of any accidents, it would be easier to deal with. John patrolled the territory with his guards, and when he had nothing to do, he often went hunting in the mountains to the west. One day, the Supreme Warrior suddenly sensed a surge of magic power in a hidden valley near the quarry, as if someone was performing a powerful divine art. He was taken aback, and quietly let his subordinates rest where they were while he quietly climbed to a nearby hilltop, where he saw Moses demonstrating high-level elemental magic to 12 miners. John was very surprised, but he did not say anything after returning, and continued to patrol the territory with his men. Link was originally in charge of surveillance in secret, but John was very alert, and by the time he discovered it, it was already too late for Link to stop him. Link knew that the general already knew the secret of Moses and the others, so he went back and reported to Duk. Hearing that John did not make any movements, also waited for him to continue. He knew very well that since John was doing this, he must have some plans. The people of Iga did not eat fish, and the people of Iga worshipped cats. There was an interesting relationship between the two, because cats liked to eat fish, but cats generally did not catch fish themselves, so the cats of Iga had no fish to eat. Schrödinger enjoyed an endless stream of good wine and delicacies, but he still liked grilled fish the most. Of course, this cat would not catch mice by itself, let alone go into the river to catch fish. Often grilled fish for Schrödinger, and one day when Schrödinger was eating, he suddenly said, "You grill so well, your grilled fish must be very delicious." Immediately knew that Schrödinger wanted to eat fish. This was the first time this cat had taken the initiative to make a request. How could he not satisfy such a small wish? The people of Iga never caught fish, believing that eating fish was an act of blasphemy against the gods. Naturally, it was not convenient for the servants to catch fish. As for Schrödinger's matters, had always done it personally. Thus, this general personally went to the Nile River to catch fish, and did not bring any followers. That day, John was patrolling the river with his personal guards, and saw the general take a boat to the Nile River for a spin. Thus, he stayed by the shore and asked the general what was the matter. Smiled and replied that it was nothing, he just came to see the scenery. Later, John discovered that the general had been taking a lone boat to the Nile River to see the scenery for a few consecutive days, and would return after a spin. What was there to see? You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.